Have you ever stopped to wonder why stories told thousands of years ago still send shivers down our spines or make our hearts race with excitement? Why do we recognize names like Hercules, Medusa, or Zeus as quickly as we know characters from our favorite films? The truth is, the myths of ancient civilizations aren't just dusty relics from a forgotten past. They live and breathe within us, shaping the stories we tell, the fears we harbor, and even the way we understand our own mind. From blockbuster movies and best-selling novels to the language of modern psychology, these timeless tales continue to echo through the centuries, reminding us that the human experience, in all its beauty and tragedy, hasn't really changed all that much. Today, we're setting off on an extraordinary journey, one that will take us deep into the heart of 30 unforgettable tales from ancient mythology. These are the stories that have captivated humanity for millennia, stories of love and betrayal, courage and madness, gods and monsters. We'll explore the myths that gave birth to epic adventures like those in Marvel's Thor, that inspired the magical world of Harry Potter, and that even helped shape how Sigmund Freud understood dreams and desires. This isn't just a history lesson, it's an invitation to rediscover the tales that helped build civilization itself, stories so powerful they've never truly left us. So settle in, open your imagination, and get ready to travel across time and space, from the sun-drenched temples of Greece to the misty Norse fjords, from the banks of the Nile to the sacred groves of India. Together, we'll uncover why these myths still resonate, what they reveal about who we are, and how they continue to inspire wonder, fear, and hope in a world that, in many ways, still lives by their lessons. This is more than a list, it's a journey into the soul of storytelling itself, and I promise by the end, you'll never look at your favorite book, movie, or even your own dreams the same way again. Our journey begins not with a gentle whisper, but with a great, formless void, a yawning emptiness the ancient Greeks called chaos. From this nothingness, the very first beings emerged, not born of love or intention, but of pure, raw potential. And the first of these primordial forces was Gaia, the earth herself, solid and vast, providing a foundation for all that was to come. Alongside her rose the deep gloom of Tartarus, the underworld's pit, and then Eros, the life-giving force of love and desire, whose power would fuel the creation of the universe. This was the very first family, a trio of incredible power that set the stage for everything. Gaia, alone yet fertile, then gave birth to Uranus, the starry sky, who became her equal and her partner. Together, they produced the next generation of divinities, the 12 mighty titans, 3 immense one-eyed cyclopes, and 3 terrifying hecatoncheires monsters with 50 heads and 100 arms each. But Uranus was a cruel and fearful father. Horrified by his own children, he shoved the cyclopes and the hecatoncheires back into the dark womb of the earth, imprisoning them deep within Gaia, causing her immense pain and anger. This act of tyranny sparked the first great cosmic rebellion. In her agony, Gaia fashioned a great sickle of adamant and appealed to her children, the Titans, to rise up against their father. Only the youngest and most cunning, Cronus, had the nerve to answer her call. He lay in wait, and when Uranus came to lie with Gaia, Cronus reached out with the sickle and castrated his father, seizing power for himself and freeing his monstrous siblings from their prison. This violent act separated the sky from the earth forever, and from the blood that fell upon the land, more creatures were born, including the mighty Erinyes, the spirits of vengeance. Cronus now ruled, but he could not escape the cycle of fear and violence he had begun. He married his sister, the Titan Rhea, but he remembered the prophecy from his parents that he, too, was destined to be overthrown by one of his own children. Consumed by paranoia, Cronus devised a horrifying solution. As each of his children was born Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, he snatched them from their mother's arms and swallowed them whole, imprisoning them within his own belly to ensure the prophecy could never come true. Rhea was devastated by this endless loss. When she was pregnant with her sixth child, she could bear it no longer. She turned to her parents, Gaia and Uranus, for help. They devised a plan to save this last child and bring Cronus's reign to an end. When the time came, Rhea went to Mount Lycaeus to give birth in secret. She handed the newborn, Zeus, over to Gaia, who hid him safely in a cave on Crete. To trick her husband, Rhea then wrapped a large stone in swaddling clothes and presented it to Cronus, who, without a second thought, swallowed it whole, believing he had once again secured his power. The young god Zeus was raised in secret, protected by nymphs and fed by the divine goat Amalthea. He grew in strength and cunning, waiting for his moment. When he came of age, he confronted his father. With the help of the Titaness Metis, Zeus prepared a powerful potion that he gave to Cronus. The drink forced the Titan king to disgorge the contents of his stomach, first the stone, and then, one by one, his 5 older children, born anew and ready for war. This united family of gods, led by Zeus, then launched a colossal war against Cronus and the Titans, the epic Titanomachy. But the reign of Zeus and his siblings was not the end of challenges to the new king's authority. One of the most profound and heartbreaking challenges came not from a rival god, but from a Titan who had fought alongside Zeus and who held a deep and unexpected compassion for a new, fragile creation, humanity. This is the story of Prometheus, whose name means forethought, a being of immense intelligence and foresight who could not stand by while the new race of humans lived in darkness and cold. When Zeus took the throne, he assigned Prometheus and his brother Epimetheus, whose name means afterthought, the task of populating the world with creatures. Epimetheus eagerly set to work, giving the best gifts: strength, speed, fur, and feathers to all the animals. By the time he got to humans, the cupboard was bare. They were left physically weak, naked, and shivering in the night. Seeing this, Prometheus was filled with pity. He decided to make them a gift that would elevate them above all other creatures, a tool that could provide warmth, cook food, forge metal, and illuminate the darkness. He decided to give them fire. This was not a simple gift, for fire was the sole property of the gods, a divine element kept only on Mount Olympus. Zeus had expressly forbidden giving it to mortals, fearing it would make them too powerful, too like the gods themselves. But Prometheus, in an act of deliberate defiance, stole a single glowing ember from the hearth of the gods. He hid it in a hollow fennel stalk and carried it down from Olympus, delivering the spark of civilization directly into the hands of humankind. With this one act, he changed the course of history forever, enabling humanity to thrive, create, and build. Zeus's rage was incandescent. The king of the gods felt betrayed and threatened. To add insult to injury, Prometheus had already played a cunning trick on him. When the time came for mortals to make a sacrifice to the gods to establish their relationship, Prometheus was tasked with preparing the offering. He butchered a great ox and divided it into 2 portions. On one side, he placed the best cuts of meat, hidden unappealingly beneath the ox's rough stomach. On the other, he piled the bare bones, but disguised them with a thick, glistening layer of rich fat. He then asked Zeus to choose which portion the gods would receive for all future sacrifices. Zeus, deceived by the tempting layer of fat, chose the pile of bones. This established the tradition where humans kept the meat for themselves and burned the bones as an offering to the gods. Zeus never forgot this humiliation. The punishment for these transgressions was horrifyingly creative and cruel. Zeus ordered the mightiest of the gods, Hephaestus and Kratos, to seize Prometheus and chain him naked to a barren rock at the ends of the earth in the Caucasus Mountains. There he was condemned to an eternity of agony. Each day, a giant eagle, the emblem of Zeus himself, would swoop down and tear open his torso to feast upon his liver. Because Prometheus was immortal, his liver would grow back each night, only for the torture to begin again at dawn. This endless cycle of pain was meant to be a permanent lesson on the price of defying the will of Olympus. Yet Prometheus's sacrifice was not in vain. His act of rebellion gifted humanity with reason, technology, and the very spark of progress. He endured his unimaginable torment for ages, a timeless symbol of the terrible cost that often comes with challenging authority and pursuing knowledge for the benefit of others. His story asks a difficult question that still resonates today. How far would you go to bring light to others, knowing you might be condemned to endless darkness for it? Prometheus chose humanity, and in doing so, he became one of mythology's most enduring and tragic heroes. And so Zeus, still seething from the defiance of Prometheus, devised a punishment that would extend beyond the tortured Titan and strike directly at the heart of his beloved humanity. If fire had lifted mankind up, Zeus would create something that would bring them low, a beautiful, irresistible catastrophe. He commanded the smith god Hephaestus to mix earth and water and mold the first woman. Hephaestus crafted a form of breathtaking beauty, a being unlike any other. The goddess Athena then breathed life into her and taught her the domestic arts of weaving and needlework. Aphrodite endowed her with unparalleled grace and desire, while Hermes, the trickster, planted in her heart a deceitful nature and a curious, persuasive voice. They named her Pandora, meaning the all-gifted, for each god had bestowed upon her a seductive and dangerous quality. She was presented as a gift, but she was truly a beautifully wrapped trap. Zeus sent her down to earth with a special wedding gift for Epimetheus, the brother of Prometheus. Despite his brother's urgent warnings never to accept any present from Zeus, Epimetheus was utterly captivated by Pandora's beauty and welcomed her without a second thought. With her, she brought a large sealed jar, what later translations would famously, though incorrectly, call a box. She had been given one strict instruction from Zeus: she was never, under any circumstances, to open it. But that single command, given to a being designed to be cunning and inquisitive, made the outcome inevitable. The jar sat in their home, a constant, tantalizing mystery. What could be inside that was so forbidden? Was it treasure, divine secrets? The curiosity that Hermes had woven into her very soul began to gnaw away at her. One day, unable to bear the wondering any longer, Pandora crept over to the jar. Her hands trembled as she reached for the heavy lid. With a great effort, she pried it open just a crack, intending only a quick, guilty peek. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The moment the seal was broken, a horrifying torrent of misery exploded from the jar, spreading across the world with terrifying speed. Out flew sickness and disease, sorrow and grief, envy, hatred, war, famine, and every possible evil that could plague humankind. Pandora, in a panic, slammed the lid back down, but it was far too late. The contents had escaped, leaving only one thing trapped inside at the very bottom: Elpis, the spirit of hope. This myth has been interpreted in countless ways over the centuries. On one level, it's a classic etiological story, a myth that explains why bad things happen. It answers the eternal question of why humanity suffers, placing the blame not on the cruelty of the gods, but on the inherent curiosity and fallibility of the first woman. For ancient Greek society, which was deeply patriarchal, the story served as a powerful cautionary tale about the dangers of female curiosity and disobedience, much like the story of Eve in the Garden of Eden. But to view it only as a simple story of blame is to miss its profound and haunting complexity. The presence of hope left behind in the jar is the key that unlocks a deeper meaning. Why was hope left inside? Was it a final, merciful gift from the gods, a tool for humanity to endure all the evils that had been released? Or was hope itself the cruelest punishment of all? Some philosophers have argued that hope is actually a negative force, a delusion that tricks humans into prolonging their suffering instead of accepting their fate. It can be a false promise that keeps us striving in a world full of pain. Yet, the more common and enduring interpretation is that hope is our greatest salvation. Having unleashed all the world's suffering, Pandora managed to trap the one thing that would allow humanity to survive it: Hope is what gives us the strength to face sickness, to rebuild after war, to find joy in spite of sorrow. It is the antidote to despair. The myth doesn't just tell us how evil entered the world, it tells us how we find the courage to live in it. The story of Pandora is ultimately a story about the human condition itself, a life filled with unavoidable hardship, but forever anchored by the possibility of something better. It asks us what we would have done in her place and whether we can truly live without that fragile, powerful thing left in the bottom of the jar. While Pandora's story explores the origins of human suffering through divine retribution and a singular, fateful mistake, another foundational myth from a far older civilization offers a far more cataclysmic vision of divine judgment, one that nearly wiped humanity from the earth entirely. This is the Great Flood, a story so powerful and pervasive that it appears in the mythologies of countless cultures, from the Greeks and the Norse to the Maya and the Aboriginal Australians. But the oldest written account we have, predating even the Bible's story of Noah by well over 1,000 years, comes from the clay tablets of ancient Mesopotamia and is immortalized in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In this epic poem, the hero King Gilgamesh, shattered by the death of his friend Enkidu, embarks on a desperate quest to find the secret of eternal life. His journey leads him to the ends of the earth, to a remote and blessed land where he finds the one man who achieved immortality, the sage Utnapishtim. It is this ancient figure who recounts the terrifying story of the deluge. The gods, led by the powerful Enlil, had grown weary of humanity. The precise reasons vary in different tellings, but it often centers on the noise and clamor of human cities, a constant disturbance that prevented the gods from their rest. Enlil, in his wrath, convened the divine assembly and convinced them to unleash a great flood to exterminate every man, woman, and child on earth. But one god, the god of wisdom and fresh water, felt compassion for humanity and decided to subvert this brutal decree. Bound by his oath to the Council of Gods, he could not openly warn mankind. Instead, he employed a clever trick. He went to the reed hut where Utnapishtim slept and spoke not to the man directly, but to the walls of his hut, knowing Utnapishtim would overhear his secret message. In this way, he delivered his warning without technically breaking his vow, instructing Utnapishtim to tear down his house and use the materials to build a giant cubical boat and to bring aboard the seed of all living things. Utnapishtim, trusting the divine message, immediately set to work. He built a massive vessel, sealing it with pitch to make it waterproof. He loaded it with his family, his craftsmen, and all the animals he could gather. Then the storm arrived. For 6 days and 7 nights, a tempest of unimaginable fury raged. The god of the winds himself, Adad, rode the storm, and the very gods of the underworld tore up the mooring posts of the world, causing the seas to rise and merge with the heavens. The world was dissolved into a single, raging ocean, and every human being outside the boat was drowned. The gods themselves, watching the destruction they had wrought, were filled with terror and retreated to the highest heaven, cowering like dogs. When the storm finally subsided, Utnapishtim's boat came to rest on the summit of Mount Nisir. He sent out a dove to search for land, but it returned, finding no place to perch. He then sent a swallow, which also came back. Finally, he sent a raven, which flew away and did not return, signaling that the waters had receded and land had emerged. Utnapishtim then emerged from the ark and offered a sacrifice to the hungry gods, who gathered around the sweet smell of the offering like flies. Enlil, arriving last, was initially enraged to see that anyone had survived. But he brilliantly defended his actions, arguing that Enlil's punishment was disproportionate and that a wiser god would have sent a famine or plague to curb humanity's numbers, not total annihilation. Shamed by this logic, Enlil blessed Utnapishtim and his wife, granting them the gift of eternal life and placing them far away, at the mouth of the rivers. The historical and archaeological context of this story is as fascinating as the myth itself. Scholars have long noted the striking parallels between the Mesopotamian flood myth and the later story of Noah in the book of Genesis. The divine warning, the building of the ark, the saving of the animals, the grounding on a mountain, and the sending of birds to find dry land. The similarities are too numerous to be mere coincidence. This suggests a shared ancestral tradition, a story that traveled across the ancient Near East, being adapted and refined by different cultures, including the Hebrews during their exile in Babylon. But could these stories be based on a real event? Geologists point to evidence of catastrophic flooding in the Black Sea region around 5,600 years ago, when rising sea levels from melting glaciers may have caused the Mediterranean to catastrophically breach a natural land barrier, flooding a vast freshwater lake and submerging thousands of square miles of inhabited land in a very short time. For the prehistoric people living there, it would have seemed like the entire world was drowning. This single traumatic event could have been seared into human collective memory, told and retold for generations until it became the foundational flood myth that spread across the world. Beyond geology, the flood narrative serves a profound psychological and theological purpose. It represents a cycle of death and rebirth, a total cleansing of a world the gods deemed corrupt, allowing for a fresh start. It establishes a new covenant between the divine and the human, a promise that such total destruction will never happen again, symbolized in the Bible by God's rainbow. But perhaps most importantly, these stories explore a fundamental shift in how humanity understood its gods. In the earliest versions like Gilgamesh, the gods are capricious, squabbling, and easily angered. Their decision to flood the world is almost whimsical. In the later Hebrew version, the flood is a specific moral judgment on human wickedness. This evolution shows our own ancient struggle to find meaning in natural disasters, to answer the question of why suffering happens, and to believe that even after the most terrible devastation, there is a promise of renewal and a chance to build again. Yet, even after enduring the torment of Prometheus and unleashing the sorrows of Pandora's jar, the gods of Olympus were not finished with their intricate and often cruel lessons for humanity. Their next great drama would star a hero of such immense strength and tragic passion that his name would become synonymous with power itself. This is the story of Hercules, a demigod born of Zeus and the mortal princess Alcmene, whose life was defined by a single, horrific act of madness and the epic path to redemption that followed. Hera, the queen of the gods and Zeus's perpetually jealous wife, loathed Hercules from the moment of his birth, seeing him as a living symbol of her husband's infidelity. She sent serpents to kill him in his cradle, but the infant Hercules merely strangled them with his bare hands, a sign of the incredible strength that was his divine birthright. Hera's hatred, however, only grew. Years later, after Hercules had married and had children of his own, Hera inflicted him with a temporary, blinding madness. In this fit of divine-induced rage, Hercules mistook his own wife and children for enemies and slaughtered them. When the fog lifted and he realized the horror of what he had done, he was utterly shattered, consumed by a guilt so profound it threatened to destroy him entirely. Seeking purification for his unforgivable crime, Hercules traveled to the Oracle of Delphi for guidance. The oracle, speaking for the gods, declared that to atone for his sins, he must enter the service of his weak and cowardly cousin, King Eurystheus of Mycenae, and perform any 10 labors the king demanded of him. Eurystheus, eager to humiliate his powerful cousin and encouraged by Hera, devised a series of tasks designed to be impossible, each one a confrontation with death itself. When Hercules completed the first 10 with astonishing success, Eurystheus, claiming 2 labors did not count due to technicalities, added 2 more, bringing the total to the legendary 12. The first labor set the tone for the incredible trials to come. Hercules was ordered to bring back the skin of the Nemean lion, a monstrous beast whose golden hide was impervious to any weapon. Hercules soon discovered that his arrows and club were useless. Using his wits as much as his strength, he tracked the lion to its cave, sealed one entrance, and entered through the other. He wrestled the beast with his bare hands, eventually strangling it to death. Since no blade could skin it, he used the lion's own razor-sharp claws to remove its hide, which he thereafter wore as his iconic, invulnerable armor. His next task was to slay the many-headed Lernaean Hydra, a venomous water serpent that grew 2 new heads for every one that was cut off. With his nephew Iolaus acting as his charioteer, Hercules engaged the beast. As he chopped off each head, Iolaus used a burning torch to cauterize the stumps, preventing regeneration. He then buried the one immortal head under a heavy rock and dipped his arrows in the Hydra's poisonous blood, creating a weapon that would later cause immense suffering. Eurystheus, however, declared this labor did not count as Hercules had received help. The labors that followed were a tour of the most terrifying creatures and challenges the ancient Greek world could imagine. He was sent to capture the Cyrenian hind, a sacred deer with golden horns and bronze hooves that was so swift it could outrun an arrow. Hercules pursued it for an entire year before finally capturing it without harming it, respecting its sacred nature to the goddess Artemis. Next, he faced the Erymanthian boar, a gigantic and ferocious beast that he drove into deep snow, where he captured it alive and carried it back to Eurystheus on his shoulders. The king was so terrified by the sight of the struggling boar that he hid in a large bronze storage jar. Perhaps the most humiliating task was the 5th labor, cleaning the immense Augean stables in a single day. King Augeas owned more cattle than any man in Greece, and his stables had not been cleaned in over 30 years, filled with a mountain of filth. Rather than attempting the impossible through brute force, Hercules once again used his cunning. He struck a bargain with Augeas, offering to do the job for a portion of his cattle. Then he simply diverted the courses of 2 nearby rivers, the Alpheus and Peneus, so that their waters rushed through the stables, scouring them completely clean. Eurystheus again tried to disqualify the labor, arguing Hercules had done it for payment. The labors grew ever more perilous and strange. He drove away the monstrous Stymphalian birds, man-eating creatures with bronze beaks and sharp metallic feathers, by using a giant bronze rattle given to him by Athena to startle them into flight, then shooting them down with his poisoned arrows. For his 7th task, he journeyed to Crete to capture the Cretan bull, the magnificent and violent father of the Minotaur, which he wrestled into submission and brought back to Greece. His 8th labor took him to Thrace to acquire the 4 man-eating mares of King Diomedes. Hercules defeated the king and fed him to his own horses, which calmed them instantly, allowing him to lead them away. The final 4 labors pushed Hercules beyond the boundaries of the known world. For his 9th task, he was commanded to retrieve the girdle of the Amazon queen Hippolyta. Initially, the queen agreed to give him her belt willingly, but Hera spread rumors among the Amazons that Hercules had come to kidnap their queen, provoking a battle. Hercules, believing he had been betrayed, was forced to kill Hippolyta and take the girdle by force. His 10th labor was to steal the cattle of the monster Geryon, a giant with 3 bodies who lived on the remote island of Erythea at the edge of the world. Hercules had to defeat Geryon and his 2-headed guard dog, Orthrus, and then endure countless more trials herding the cattle back to Greece. With 10 labors complete, Eurystheus demanded 2 more. The 11th was to steal the golden apples from the garden of the Hesperides, which was guarded by a 100-headed dragon. This quest was less about brute force and more a journey of seeking wisdom. Hercules learned he could not steal the apples himself. He needed help. He enlisted the Titan Atlas, who held up the sky, by offering to hold the celestial weight on his own shoulders while Atlas retrieved the apples. When Atlas returned and suggested he would deliver the apples himself and leave Hercules holding the sky forever, the hero pretended to agree but asked Atlas to take the sky back for just a moment so he could adjust his cloak. The moment Atlas shouldered the burden again, Hercules took the apples and left. The 12th and final labor was the most terrifying of all, to descend into the underworld itself and bring back Cerberus, the massive three-headed hound that guarded the gates of Hades. With the permission of Hades himself, who agreed on the condition that Hercules subdue the beast without weapons, the hero ventured into the land of the dead. He found Cerberus and, using his immense strength and his lion skin cloak for protection, wrestled the hellhound into submission. He then carried the struggling monster up to the world of the living and presented it to a horrified Eurystheus, who immediately begged him to return it, thus completing the final labor. Through these 12 impossible tasks, Hercules achieved more than just redemption. He became the ultimate archetype of the hero. His story is not just one of strength, but of perseverance, ingenuity, and the capacity for a flawed being to overcome unimaginable adversity and find forgiveness. He faced beasts, monsters, and gods, but his greatest battle was always against his own tragic nature and the weight of his past. He proved that even the greatest sin could be atoned for through courage and endurance, leaving a legacy that would echo through the ages as the pinnacle of heroic myth. While Hercules represents the ultimate test of strength against the monsters of the wild, our next hero faces a monster of a very different kind, one born from the twisted politics and dark secrets of a powerful civilization. This is the story of Theseus and the Minotaur, a tale that takes us from the bustling city of Athens to the awe-inspiring and terrifying palace of Knossos on the island of Crete, the heart of the magnificent Minoan Empire. The story begins with a grave and humiliating injustice. Years earlier, the Athenians had been defeated in a war against the mighty King Minos of Crete. As punishment, Minos demanded a gruesome tribute every 9 years. 7 young Athenian men and 7 young women were to be sent to Crete, where they would be thrown into a vast, inescapable maze known as the Labyrinth. Inside lurked the Minotaur, a monstrous creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull, who would hunt and devour them all. This cycle of sacrifice continued until the young Prince Theseus, the secret son of King Aegeus of Athens, reached adulthood. Horrified by this cruel fate inflicted upon his people, Theseus volunteered to be one of the 14 tributes, vowing to his father that he would slay the Minotaur and end the bloody tradition. He promised that on his return voyage, he would change the ship's sail from black to white as a signal of his victory. If he failed, the black sail would remain a sign of his death. Upon their arrival in Crete, the tributes were paraded before King Minos and his court. It was here that Theseus caught the eye of the king's daughter, the clever and compassionate Princess Ariadne. Smitten with the brave young hero and appalled by her father's brutality, she decided to betray her family and help him. That night, she secretly brought Theseus 2 gifts that would ensure his survival: a ball of magic thread and a sword. She explained the secret of the labyrinth, a masterwork of design created by the legendary artisan Daedalus. It was so complex that once inside, no one had ever found their way out. Her plan was simple yet brilliant. Theseus was to tie one end of the thread to the entranceway and let the ball unwind as he ventured deeper into the maze. After defeating the monster, he could simply follow the thread back to freedom. The next day, the 14 Athenians were forced into the dark, confusing passages of the labyrinth. The air was thick with the smell of damp stone and the echoing, distant bellow of the beast. As the others cowered in fear, Theseus tied off the thread and moved forward alone, unwinding the ball as he went, a thin lifeline in an ocean of stone. He ventured deeper and deeper into the twisting corridors, a place designed to drive men mad with its endless, identical turns. Finally, in the very heart of the maze, he found the Minotaur. The battle was fierce and brutal, a raw contest of strength and will. Using the sword from Ariadne, Theseus ultimately triumphed, slaying the monstrous symbol of Crete's dominance over Athens. Following the guiding thread back through the shadows, he emerged victorious, leading the other terrified Athenians to safety. They quickly fled to their ship, with Ariadne joining them, and set sail for Athens. However, the story takes a heartbreaking turn. On the journey home, they stopped at the island of Naxos for reasons lost to different interpretations. Perhaps a change of heart by Theseus, a command from the god Dionysus, or simply a terrible mistake Ariadne was left behind on the island. This act of abandonment would have tragic consequences. Grieving for his son and watching the horizon for his return, King Aegeus stood on a high cliff in Athens. When he spotted the ship approaching, he saw that in the tumult of departure and the grief of losing Ariadne, Theseus had forgotten his promise to change the sail from black to white. Seeing the black sail, the king believed his son was dead. Overcome with despair, Aegeus threw himself into the sea, which to this day bears his name, the Aegean Sea. The power of this myth is deeply enhanced by its roots in real history and archaeology. The Grand Palace of Knossos on Crete, excavated by Sir Arthur Evans in the early 20th century, is a sprawling complex of over 1,000 interconnecting rooms, courtyards, and corridors. To an outside observer, it would have indeed seemed like a labyrinth. The Minoan civilization, which peaked around 2,000 years before the classical Greek era, was the dominant naval power in the region, and it is highly plausible that Athens and other mainland Greek cities were forced to pay tribute to them. Furthermore, Minoan art is filled with powerful bull imagery, from frescoes of acrobats leaping over charging bulls to sacred rituals. The myth of the Minotaur, a half-man, half-bull creature, could easily be a distorted memory of these bull-centric rituals, perhaps even involving a costumed priest-king who performed a sacred dance, becoming a bull of Minos in the eyes of outsiders. The story of Theseus and the Minotaur is far more than a simple monster-slaying adventure. It is a foundational myth about the transition of power from the old Minoan thalassocracy to the rising power of mainland Greece, symbolized by Athens. It is a story about using intelligence and cunning, represented by Ariadne's thread, to navigate impossible complexity and overcome brute force. But most profoundly, it is a tragedy about the fallibility of even the greatest heroes. Theseus succeeds in his glorious quest but fails in a simple human task, and that small forgetfulness leads to his father's death. It is a timeless reminder that our greatest victories can sometimes be undone by our smallest oversights, and that the path out of the labyrinth is often just as perilous as the monster waiting at its center. Yet the grand tales of labyrinthine monsters and heroic quests for redemption were not the only stories that defined the ancient Greek world. If there is one legend that has captured the imagination of the Western world more than any other, a story that has been retold for 3,000 years in poetry, art, and film, it is the epic of the Trojan War. This was not a simple clash of armies, but a decade-long saga of pride, love, rage, and divine mischief that would ultimately lead to the utter destruction of a magnificent city. Our story begins not on a battlefield but at a divine wedding. The sea nymph Thetis was marrying the mortal king Peleus, and all the gods were invited, all, that is, except for Eris, the goddess of discord. Furious at the snub, she arrived uninvited and tossed a single golden apple into the midst of the party, inscribed with the words, "To the fairest." Immediately, three powerful goddesses claimed the prize: Hera, the queen of the gods; Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war; and Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. None of the other gods dared to judge between them, so the task fell to a mortal, a young shepherd prince named Paris, who had been abandoned on Mount Ida because of a prophecy that he would bring ruin to his city, Troy. Each goddess approached Paris and offered him a bribe to choose her. Hera promised him unimaginable political power, rule over all of Asia. Athena offered wisdom and unmatched skill in war, guaranteeing he would never lose a battle. But Aphrodite promised him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris, swayed by desire, awarded the apple to Aphrodite. This single decision, the so-called judgment of Paris, set a catastrophic sequence of events into motion, for the most beautiful woman was Helen of Sparta, who was already married to King Menelaus. Guided by Aphrodite, Paris traveled to Sparta, where he was welcomed as a guest by Menelaus. When the king left for a funeral, Paris violated the sacred laws of hospitality, abducting Helen and sailing with her back to Troy. Some versions say she went willingly, enchanted by the goddess. Others say she was taken by force. Regardless, the result was the same. Menelaus, enraged by this betrayal, called upon all the kings and heroes of Greece who had once sworn an oath to defend his marriage rights. They answered the call, led by his powerful brother Agamemnon, king of Mycenae. A vast armada of 1,000 ships set sail for Troy, beginning a siege that would last 10 long years. This is the point where Homer's great epic, the Iliad, picks up the story, though it focuses not on the entire war, but on a few critical weeks in the 10th and final year. The poem's central theme is the destructive, all-consuming rage of the Greeks' greatest warrior, Achilles. When Agamemnon is forced to return a captured woman, Chryseis, to her father, a priest of Apollo, he arrogantly seizes Achilles' own war prize, the woman Briseis, to compensate himself. This public dishonor cuts Achilles to his core. In a fit of wrath, he withdraws from the war, taking his Myrmidon warriors with him, and pleads with his mother, Thetis, to ask Zeus to let the Trojans win, just so Agamemnon will realize how much he needs him. With their best fighter gone, the Greeks begin to lose badly. The Trojans, led by the noble Hector, push them back to their beached ships and nearly set them ablaze. Achilles' closest companion, Patroclus, can bear to watch the slaughter no longer. He begs Achilles to let him wear his famous armor and lead the Myrmidons into battle, hoping to rally the Greek forces. Achilles reluctantly agrees, but warns him only to drive the Trojans back from the ships, not to pursue them to the city walls. Patroclus enters the fray and succeeds brilliantly, but in the heat of battle he disobeys, chasing the Trojans all the way back to Troy. There he is confronted and killed by Hector, who strips the armor from his body. The news of Patroclus's death shatters Achilles. His personal rage toward Agamemnon is instantly replaced by a far more primal and terrifying grief directed at Hector and the Trojans. Thetis has the god Hephaestus forge him a new, magnificent set of armor, and Achilles returns to the war, a whirlwind of vengeance. He cuts a bloody path through the Trojan army, even fighting the river god Scamander, who is angered by the number of corpses Achilles is dumping into his waters. He finally corners Hector outside the walls of Troy, kills him in single combat, and then commits a horrific sacrilege. He ties Hector's body to the back of his chariot and drags it through the dust around the walls of Troy for days, refusing to allow his enemy a proper burial. It is only when the old King Priam, Hector's father, secretly enters the Greek camp at night to kneel and kiss the hands of the man who killed his son, begging for the body, that Achilles' rage finally breaks. The two enemies, a young warrior and an old king, weep together over the senseless tragedies of war, and a momentary peace is found for Hector's funeral rites. The Iliad ends here with the war still raging. The war could not be won by force alone. The city's walls were too strong. The end finally came through a stroke of cunning, an idea from the clever Odysseus. The Greeks built a gigantic, hollow wooden horse, an offering to the goddess Athena they claimed would bring her favor to the Trojans. They hid their best warriors inside its belly, burned their own camp, and sailed away, hiding behind a nearby island. The Trojans, seeing the Greeks gone and the horse left behind, debated what to do. Some, like the priest Laocoon, were suspicious, famously crying, "I fear the Greeks even when bearing gifts." But the gods sent sea serpents to kill Laocoon and his sons, silencing his warnings. Deceived by a Greek spy named Sinon, who spun a tale of the horse's divine purpose, the Trojans tore down a section of their own impenetrable walls to drag the offering inside. They spent the day celebrating what they believed was their victory. That night, while the city slept, the Greek fleet silently returned. The warriors inside the horse crept out and opened the gates for the entire army, which poured into the unsuspecting city. What followed was a night of absolute horror and destruction. The Greeks slaughtered the Trojans, men, women, and children with merciless efficiency. King Priam was killed at the altar of his own palace. The women, including Queen Hecuba and the prophetess Cassandra, were taken as slaves. The city was put to the torch, its towers crumbling into ash. Aphrodite's promise to Paris had been fulfilled, but it had cost his entire family, his city, and his civilization everything. For centuries, the Trojan War was thought to be pure myth, a compelling story but not history. That changed in the 1870s when a wealthy German businessman and self-taught archaeologist named Heinrich Schliemann became obsessed with proving Homer's tales were true. Using the Iliad as his guide, he began excavating a large mound in northwest Turkey called Hisarlik. To the astonishment of the scholarly world, he discovered the remains of not one, but multiple ancient cities, built one on top of the other over thousands of years. One of these layers, now known as Troy 7a, shows clear evidence of violent destruction, collapsed walls, arrowheads embedded in the fortifications, and a layer of burning ash and debris that suggests it was sacked by war around the time the war was supposed to have happened, around 1250 BC. Schliemann's methods were crude and destructive by modern standards, but his discovery revolutionized our understanding. It suggested that the epic poem was a distorted memory of a real, major conflict between the powerful Mycenaean Greeks and the wealthy city of Troy, which controlled vital trade routes through the Dardanelles. The abduction of Helen may be a poetic explanation for a war that was likely fought over trade, resources, and political power. The gods and goddesses arguing on the battlefield can be seen as allegories for human passions, Athena representing strategic wisdom, Ares representing pure bloodlust, and Aphrodite representing the desires that so often lead us into conflict. The story of the Trojan War endures because it is about us, our capacity for both noble heroism and unspeakable brutality, the pride that can lead to our downfall, and the enduring hope that even from the ashes of total destruction, new stories can begin. But the fall of Troy was not the end of the story for all its Greek conquerors. For one man, the king of the rocky island of Ithaca, the end of the war marked the beginning of an even longer and more perilous ordeal, a decade-long struggle to find his way home. This is the epic journey of Odysseus, the man of twists and turns, whose name has become synonymous with a long and adventurous voyage. His story, immortalized in Homer's Odyssey, is the ultimate testament to the power of cunning over strength, the relentless pull of home, and the human spirit's incredible capacity to endure. For 10 years, Odysseus had fought at Troy, but his true test began the day he set sail for home. His fleet of 12 ships and his loyal crew were immediately blown off course by a vengeful storm, setting the stage for a series of trials that would push them to the very brink of annihilation. Their first major encounter was with the Lotus Eaters, a peaceful people whose diet consisted of a magical, hypnotic plant. When some of Odysseus's men ate the lotus flower, they lost all memory of their home and their mission, content to remain in a blissful, apathetic stupor forever. Odysseus had to drag them back to the ships, physically forcing them to continue their journey, a stark early lesson in the dangers of forgetting your purpose. Their next stop was far more treacherous, the island of the Cyclopes, a race of lawless, one-eyed giants. Odysseus, driven by a combination of curiosity and a hope for hospitality, entered a large cave with 12 of his best men. They soon discovered it was the home of a monstrous Cyclops named Polyphemus, the son of the sea god Poseidon. When the giant returned, he sealed the cave entrance with a massive boulder and, with chilling casualness, devoured 2 of Odysseus's men for his dinner. Trapped, Odysseus knew that even if they killed the monster, they could never move the boulder to escape. He needed a plan. The next evening, Odysseus offered the Cyclops strong, undiluted wine he had brought from his ship. As the giant grew drunk and fell into a stupor, Odysseus and his men heated the tip of a large wooden stake in the fire and drove it into the Cyclops' single eye, blinding him. The next morning, the blinded Polyphemus rolled the boulder aside to let his sheep out to graze. but he sat at the entrance, feeling each animal to ensure the men did not escape. But Odysseus had outsmarted him yet again. He tied his men underneath the bellies of the rams, and he himself clung to the fleece of the largest sheep. As they passed through the entrance, Polyphemus felt only the animals' backs, and the Greeks escaped to their ships. It was here that Odysseus made his one catastrophic mistake. As they sailed away, filled with triumph, he could not resist shouting back his real name to the enraged, blinded giant, taunting him. This act of pride gave Polyphemus the exact information he needed to curse his tormentor by name, calling upon his father Poseidon to ensure that Odysseus would lose all his men and wander the sea for 10 long years before finding a troubled home. This curse would define the rest of his journey. From there, the challenges only grew more surreal and dangerous. They arrived at the island of Aeolia, where the king of the winds, Aeolus, gifted Odysseus a leather bag containing all the storm winds tied tightly shut. With only a gentle west wind to guide them, they sailed for 9 days and came within sight of the shores of Ithaca. But while Odysseus slept exhausted, his men, convinced the bag held gold and treasure that their leader was hoarding from them, untied it. The unleashed winds exploded out, creating a hurricane that blew them all the way back to Aeolia, where the angry king refused to help them again. Their own greed and distrust had cost them their homecoming. Next, they encountered the Laestrygonians, a tribe of giant cannibals who destroyed 11 of Odysseus's 12 ships, hurling boulders from the cliffs and spearing his men like fish. Only Odysseus's own ship escaped, carrying the last of his crew to another mysterious island. This was Aea, the home of the beautiful and powerful enchantress Circe. When a scouting party entered her palace, she welcomed them and fed them a feast laced with a potion that turned them all into pigs, trapping them in animal form while retaining their human minds. Only one man escaped to tell Odysseus. Armed with a magical herb called moly given to him by the god Hermes, Odysseus marched to Circe's hall. He was immune to her magic and threatened her with his sword. Impressed by his courage and resilience, Circe not only released his men but became his lover and advisor. They remained with her for a year, and when they were finally ready to depart, she gave Odysseus crucial instructions for the next leg of his journey. He must travel to the edge of the world, to the land of the dead, and seek the counsel of the blind prophet Theseus. This descent into the underworld is one of the most haunting parts of the epic. Odysseus performed a blood sacrifice, and the spirits of the dead flocked to drink it, temporarily regaining their voices. He spoke with the shade of Theseus, who foretold his future, warning him that he and his men must leave the cattle of the sun god Helios alone on the island of Thrinacia, or they would all be destroyed. He also prophesied that Odysseus would eventually make it home alone on a stranger's ship, to find suitors devouring his wealth and courting his wife. Most heartbreakingly, Odysseus encountered the ghost of his own mother, who had died of grief during his long absence, and he learned of the quiet tragedy unfolding back in Ithaca in his name. Guided by Circe's further advice, Odysseus and his crew navigated a series of iconic mythological hazards. They passed the sirens, whose beautiful, irresistible song lured sailors to their doom on the rocky coast. On Circe's instructions, Odysseus had his men plug their ears with beeswax, but he, wanting to hear the song, had them tie him tightly to the mast with orders not to release him no matter how much he begged. It was a perfect act of self-aware cunning, allowing him to experience the danger without succumbing to it. Next, they had to sail through the narrow strait between the six-headed monster Scylla and the whirlpool Charybdis. Theseus had told him there was no victory here, only a choice of losses. Following this grim advice, Odysseus steered closer to Scylla, who snatched 6 of his best men from the deck, devouring them as they passed, rather than risk the entire ship being swallowed by the whirlpool. Exhausted and traumatized, they finally reached the island of Thrinacia, the home of Helios's sacred cattle. Despite Odysseus's fervent warnings, his men, trapped on the island for a month by contrary winds and starving, eventually slaughtered and ate some of the sacred cows while Odysseus slept. Their sacrilege had immediate and devastating consequences. When they set sail again, Zeus sent a thunderbolt that shattered the ship, killing everyone on board. Odysseus alone survived, clinging to the wreckage. He eventually washed up, alone and bereft, on the shores of the island of Ogygia, where the nymph Calypso lived. She fell in love with him and held him captive as her lover for 7 long years, offering him immortality if he would stay with her and forget Ithaca. But Odysseus, though he wept daily from homesickness, refused. His heart remained fixed on his home, his wife Penelope, and his son Telemachus. His eventual release came only through the direct intervention of the gods. Athena, his patron, persuaded Zeus to send the messenger god Hermes to order Calypso to let him go. She reluctantly provided him with tools to build a raft, and he set out once more, only to be shipwrecked yet again by a vengeful Poseidon. He washed ashore, naked and battered, on the island of the Phaeacians. It is here that he finally tells his incredible story to the king and queen. Moved by his tale, they provide him with a magical ship that carries him at long last back to Ithaca. But his journey was not over. Arriving after 20 years away, he found his palace overrun by over 100 suitors, all vying for Penelope's hand, certain Odysseus was dead. They were devouring his wealth and threatening his son. With Athena's help, Odysseus disguised himself as an old beggar to assess the situation. He found his wife, Penelope, had remained steadfastly faithful, using her own brilliant cunning to hold the suitors at bay for years by unpicking her weaving each night, promising to choose a husband when she finished a shroud for Odysseus's father. The theme of Nostos, or homecoming, reaches its peak not in a simple reunion but in a test. Penelope, wary of tricks, devised a final test. She announced she would marry whoever could string Odysseus's great bow and shoot an arrow through the handles of 12 axes. None of the suitors could even string the bow. The old beggar, Odysseus, then took it, strung it with ease, and executed the shot perfectly. He then turned the bow on the suitors and, with the help of his son and a few loyal servants, slaughtered them all, reclaiming his home and his kingdom in a bloody, decisive act of vengeance. The Odyssey is more than a sequel to the Iliad. It is its philosophical counterpart. Where the Iliad is about the glory and horror of war, the Odyssey is about the struggle for peace and the quiet, enduring strength of the home. Odysseus's greatest weapon was never his sword, but his mind, his metis, or cunning intelligence. He is the man of many turns, and his story champions the virtues of adaptability, patience, and resilience. It is a foundational narrative about identity, exploring what it means to be a stranger, a leader, a husband, and a father. And at its heart is Penelope, a hero in her own right, whose intellectual equal she proves to be. Their reunion is not just the end of a journey, but the hard-won restoration of a partnership built on mutual respect and wit, a testament that some things, like home and love, are worth wandering 20 years to find. Leaving behind the treacherous seas and long-delayed homecomings of the Greek heroes, our journey now takes us to the sun-baked hills of central Italy, where a new kind of destiny was being forged, one that would eventually build an empire that stretched from Britain to Babylon. This is the legendary tale of Rome's violent and miraculous birth, a story the Romans themselves held sacred, not as mere fiction, but as the divine origin of their national character and their right to rule the world. The saga begins with a tragedy in the ancient city of Alba Longa, where the rightful king, Numitor, was overthrown by his cruel younger brother, Amulius. To secure his stolen throne, Amulius murdered Numitor's male heirs and forced his daughter, Silvia, to become a Vestal virgin, a priestess sworn to celibacy, ensuring she could produce no rival claimants. But the god Mars, the fierce and passionate deity of war, had other plans. He was captivated by Silvia, and from their union she gave birth to twin boys, Romulus and Remus. Enraged and fearful, King Amulius ordered the infants to be drowned in the Tiber River. His servants placed the babies in a basket and cast them into the swift currents, assuming the river would finish the grim task. But fate intervened. The waters gently carried the basket downstream until it caught in the roots of a fig tree near the base of the Palatine Hill. There, a she-wolf, Lupa in Latin, heard their cries. Drawn by a divine instinct, she did not harm them. Instead, she nursed them with her own milk, nurturing them and keeping them warm alongside her own cubs. This incredible image of the future founders of the world's greatest empire suckled by a wild beast became the most powerful symbol of Rome itself, representing a ferocious, untamable strength tempered by a surprising capacity for nurturing and community. Their sanctuary was soon discovered by a shepherd named Faustulus. Intrigued by the wolf's behavior, he investigated and found the twins. He and his wife, Acalarentia, took the boys in and raised them as their own sons, unaware of their royal blood. Romulus and Remus grew into natural leaders, strong, courageous, and charismatic. They led a band of local shepherds, often clashing with bandits and rivals. During one such skirmish, Remus was captured and taken before the deposed King Numitor. Upon questioning the young man and hearing the story of his upbringing, Numitor began to suspect the truth. When Romulus arrived with his men to rescue his brother, the pieces fell into place. The twins learned their true identities, rallied their supporters, and overthrew the usurper Amulius, restoring their grandfather Numitor to the throne of Alba Longa. With their birthright secured, the brothers decided to found a new city of their own on the very spot where the she-wolf had saved them. But almost immediately, a bitter rivalry erupted between them. Both desired the honor of founding and naming the city, and they could not agree on which of the 7 hills to build upon. Romulus favored the Palatine, while Remus preferred the Aventine. They decided to settle the matter through augury, the ancient practice of seeking signs from the gods by observing the flight of birds. They sat on their respective hills and waited. Remus was the first to see a sign. 6 vultures flew overhead, but soon after Romulus saw 12. Each brother claimed victory. Remus argued he saw his sign first, while Romulus countered that his was greater in number. Their followers erupted into arguments, and in the heated dispute that followed, Romulus began to mark the sacred boundary of his new city, plowing a deep furrow called a pomerium around the Palatine Hill. This line was inviolable, marking the division between the city and the wilderness, and to cross it armed was a sacrilege. What happened next is one of the most famous and chilling moments in all of mythology. In an act of pure contempt, Remus leaped over the newly dug furrow, mocking the weakness of his brother's walls and his claim to power. For Romulus, this was not just a personal insult. It was a blasphemous violation of the city's sacred boundary, an omen that would doom the settlement before it even began. In a fury, Romulus struck his brother down, killing him on the spot. According to the Roman historian Livy, he stood over the body and declared, "So perish forever whoever else shall leap over my walls." With this single, brutal act of fraternal violence, the city had its founder and its name, Rome. But Romulus faced an immediate and critical problem. He had a city but no people. To populate Rome, he opened its gates to outcasts from all over the region. Exiles, runaway slaves, criminals, and adventurers, anyone seeking a fresh start. While this gave him a population, it created another dire issue. The city had almost no women. Without women, there could be no families, no children, and no future. The neighboring tribes, looking down on Rome's motley crew of inhabitants, refused to allow their daughters to marry these men. Ever the pragmatist, Romulus devised a daring and ruthless solution. He announced a great festival in honor of the god Theseus and invited all the neighboring peoples, including the wealthy Sabines, to attend. Entire families came, curious to see the new city. At the height of the celebrations, when the games were in full swing and everyone was distracted, Romulus gave a pre-arranged signal. His men drew their swords and rushed into the crowd, not to kill but to seize. Each Roman grabbed an unmarried Sabine woman and carried her off to his home, fighting off the women's outraged fathers and brothers. This event, known as the rape of the Sabine women, was not an act of random violence in the modern sense, but a calculated mass abduction with the specific goal of forced marriage. The aftermath of this shocking event is where the myth takes a profound turn, deeply reflecting the complex Roman ideals of assimilation and citizenship. The Sabine king, Titus Tatius, naturally declared war and marched on Rome. A fierce battle ensued, but just as the two sides were about to clash for a final time, the abducted Sabine women themselves rushed onto the battlefield. They did not choose a side. They threw themselves between their Roman husbands and their Sabine fathers and brothers, begging them to stop. They pleaded that they did not want to be widows and orphans, that they had come to accept their new lives and even care for their husbands. Their powerful intervention brought both sides to a halt. Moved by their words, the leaders not only made peace but agreed to form a single, united people. Romulus and Titus Tatius agreed to rule jointly as kings, merging the Roman and Sabine populations into one. This unification of the fierce, outsider strength of Rome with the established traditional nobility of the Sabines created a powerful synergy that would become a cornerstone of the Roman Empire's later policy: conquer, then absorb and assimilate the best of what others have to offer. The legend of Romulus and Remus is far more than a simple origin story. For the Romans, it was a foundational narrative that explained their entire worldview. The fratricide established a stark precedent that the security of the state was paramount, outweighing even family bonds, a concept that would echo through centuries of Roman history. The abduction of the Sabines illustrated their pragmatic, often brutal, approach to problem-solving, while the subsequent reconciliation showcased their unique talent for incorporating conquered peoples into their polity, eventually granting them Roman citizenship. And the she-wolf at the story's heart remained the ultimate symbol, a people raised by the wild, fierce and uncompromising, yet bound together by a powerful sense of community and destiny. It was a story that told every Roman citizen that their city was born from a mix of divine favor, brutal necessity, and an unbreakable will to survive and dominate. Yet even as Rome was rising from a foundation of fratricide and forced union, far to the north in the cold, misty realms of the Norse gods, a very different kind of story was unfolding, one not of violent birth, but of a beautiful, peaceful death that would crack the world in two. This is the tragic tale of Baldur the Beautiful, a story of prophecy, paranoia, and a single, overlooked sprig of mistletoe that would set in motion the irreversible countdown to the end of all things. Baldur, the son of Odin and Frigg, was the most beloved of all the gods in Asgard. He was the god of light, joy, purity, and summer itself. His presence was so radiant that he literally shone, and his kindness and fairness brought peace and happiness to all the realms. But this golden age was shattered when Baldur began to be haunted by terrible, prophetic nightmares, visions of his own death, dark and cold and permanent. These were not mere bad dreams. In the Norse world, such visions were portents of an inescapable fate. The entire court of Asgard was thrown into a panic, for the loss of Baldur would mean the loss of light and goodness from the world. His mother, the goddess Frigg, refused to accept this fate. She embarked on a desperate, exhaustive quest to save her son. She traveled to every corner of the 9 worlds, seeking out every single thing in all of creation and extracting from it a solemn oath never to harm Baldur. She spoke to fire and water, to iron and gold, to stones and trees, to diseases and poisons, to the claws of beasts and the teeth of predators. Every entity, great and small, swore the binding vow, for all things loved Baldur. Convinced she had sealed his safety, Frigg returned to Asgard and announced that her son was now invulnerable. This new immunity became a grand sport for the gods. They would gather in the courtyard and take turns throwing weapons at Baldur: spears, axes, stones. and watching them all harmlessly bounce off or veer away, much to their delight and laughter. It was a celebration of their triumph over prophecy, a display of their collective power to defy fate itself. But one god watched these games with growing resentment and spite: Loki, the shape-shifting trickster. Loki, who thrived on chaos and could not abide such untainted joy and security, grew determined to find the flaw in Frigg's perfect plan. Disguising himself as an old woman, he went to visit Frigg in her hall, Fensalir. He sat with her and, pretending to make innocent conversation, remarked on the amusing game the gods were playing. He asked if it was truly true that absolutely everything had sworn the oath. The confident Frigg replied that yes, she had been utterly thorough. There was, however, one minor exception. There was a young shrub that grew west of Valhalla called mistletoe. It seemed so small, so young, and so harmless that she saw no reason to demand an oath from it. Upon hearing this, Loki vanished, his mission accomplished. He immediately went to the spot, cut a sprig of the mistletoe, and carved it into a sharp dart. He then returned to the gods' game, seeking out one god who was not participating: Hodyor, Baldur's own twin brother. Hodyor was blind, and so he stood apart from the merriment, unable to aim or join in the fun. Feigning kindness, Loki approached him and offered to help. He placed the mistletoe dart in Hodyor's hand and guided his aim, offering to direct his throw so he could honor his brother. The unsuspecting Hodyor, grateful for the chance to participate, threw the dart as Loki guided him. The atmosphere shattered in an instant. The mistletoe projectile flew straight and true, piercing Baldur's chest. The god of light cried out, then fell to the ground dead. The laughter of the gods was cut off, replaced by a silence so profound it was itself a sound. Their greatest fear had been realized, not by a giant or a monster, but by the smallest, most overlooked thing in all creation, wielded by the hand of his own blind brother. The joy of Asgard died with Baldur. What followed was a grief unlike any the nine worlds had ever known. The gods were frozen, first by shock, then by a sorrow so deep it was physical. The giantess Rinda bore a son, Vali, who grew to adulthood in a single day for the sole purpose of avenging Baldur. He immediately went and slew the helpless, grieving Hodyor, completing the circle of familial tragedy. Hermod the Bold, another of Odin's sons, volunteered to ride Odin's eight-legged horse Sleipnir on a desperate quest to the land of the dead, Helheim, to plead with its ruler, the goddess Hel, for Baldur's release. Hermod rode for 9 nights through dark and deep valleys until he reached the bridge over the river Gjöll and entered Hel's decrepit hall. He found Baldur there, sitting in the place of honor but still a prisoner of death. He begged Hel to release him, arguing that Baldur was so beloved that all things in the world wept for him. The cunning goddess, perhaps moved, perhaps testing the gods, agreed to a condition. If every single thing in all of creation, living and dead, would weep for Baldur, then she would allow him to return to Asgard. But if even one thing refused, he would remain with her. The gods immediately sent out messengers across all the worlds, and just as Hel predicted, everything began to weep. Men and women wept, giants and dwarves wept, stones and trees wept, even metals wept. The messengers were returning triumphant, believing they had met the condition, when they came upon a giantess sitting alone in a cave. Her name was Thirk, which means thanks, but she was almost certainly Loki in disguise once more. When they asked her to weep for Baldur, she refused, coldly stating, "Let Hel hold what she has." And so, by the refusal of a single entity, Baldur was lost to the world of the living forever. The consequences of this act were cosmic. The death of Baldur was the point of no return for the Norse gods. It was the first event in the long, foretold chain of disasters known as Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. It proved that even their most powerful magic and their most heartfelt efforts could not stop fate. It confirmed that Loki's role was not merely that of a mischievous prankster, but of a genuine, world-ending adversary. the gods captured Loki and punished him in a manner as brutal and creative as his crime. They bound him to 3 sharp rocks inside a cave using the entrails of his own son, which the gods had turned into unbreakable iron chains. A venomous snake was placed above his head, its poison dripping onto his face. His faithful wife, Sigyn, sits by his side holding a bowl to catch the poison, but whenever she must turn away to empty it, the venom strikes his face, causing him to writhe in agony so violent that it causes earthquakes. There he will lie bound until the day Ragnarok begins. The myth of Baldur's death is one of the most psychologically profound in all of mythology because it is about the impossibility of perfect safety and the vulnerability of goodness in a world that contains chaos. Frigg's attempt to protect her son from every known danger is a deeply relatable parental impulse, but it is undone by the one thing she deemed too insignificant to threaten him: a powerful lesson about the unpredictable nature of tragedy. Loki's actions reveal how resentment can fester at the sight of innocent joy, driving someone to destroy what they cannot be a part of. But most of all, the story establishes a core, heartbreaking truth of Norse mythology: that the world is fundamentally fragile, that the gods are not all powerful, and that even the most radiant light will eventually be extinguished, setting the stage for a final, fiery rebirth. While the tragic death of Baldur cast a long and sorrowful shadow over Asgard, the Norse gods were no strangers to direct and thunderous confrontation with the forces of chaos. This brings us to one of the most iconic and vividly physical of all the Norse myths, a tale that pits the realm's greatest defender against the most monstrous embodiment of its ultimate enemy. This is the story of Thor's legendary fishing trip, a seemingly simple outing that escalates into a cosmic struggle of literally earth-shaking proportions. Our story begins not with a quest, but with a domestic scene that would have been familiar to any Viking Age listener. Thor, the god of thunder and protector of both gods and humanity, is a guest in the hall of the giant Hymir. The giant is a surly and unwelcoming host, and the next morning when the gods wish to feast, Hymir declares there is not enough food for them all. He suggests they go fishing to procure their own meal, a challenge Thor readily accepts. This simple premise, a test of provisioning, immediately sets the stage for a clash of egos and power. Hymir, confident in his own strength and likely hoping to embarrass his divine guest, leads Thor to his shed where he keeps his bait and gear. He tells Thor to find his own bait, a seemingly simple task, but the god of thunder, never one for subtlety, immediately goes for the giant's largest prize bull, tears off its head with his bare hands and declares himself ready. Hymir's shock and dismay are palpable. This was not the cautious behavior he expected from a guest. They set out to sea in Hymir's boat, and the giant, still trying to assert his dominance, rows them out to his usual fishing grounds, a place where he reliably catches whales. But Thor is not interested in whales. He commands Hymir to row further out, much further, into the deep, dark waters that lie beyond the edge of the known world. Hymir grows fearful, warning Thor that they are approaching the domain of the Midgard serpent, the monstrous Jormungandr who circles the entire world beneath the ocean. This, of course, is precisely Thor's intention. He has not come for a simple meal, he has come for a reckoning. Ignoring the giant's terrified protests, Thor prepares his gear. He takes the massive ox head, fixes it onto his fishing hook, and casts his line into the abyssal depths. Almost immediately, there is a tremendous tug on the line. The force is so immense that Thor, the strongest of all the gods, is nearly pulled overboard. Bracing his feet against the hull of the boat with such power that the planks strain and his feet punch straight through the bottom, he begins to haul his catch to the surface. This is no whale. The struggle that follows is a moment of breathtaking tension and power. Thor heaves on the line, his divine muscles straining, while the creature below fights with the primal strength of the deep. The sea begins to churn and boil around them. Then the surface breaks. First, the hook emerges, still embedded firmly in the upper jaw of the beast. Then, rising from the frothing water, comes the monstrous head of Jormungandr itself, eyes burning with ancient malice, venom dripping from its fangs and hissing as it strikes the sea. The serpent is colossal, a living embodiment of the primordial chaos that the gods of Asgard constantly battle to keep at bay. For a single, frozen moment, Thor and his ultimate adversary are face to face, the destiny of the world hanging in the balance between them. Thor reaches for his hammer, Mjolnir, ready to deliver the crushing blow that would end the serpent's threat forever. But the giant Hymir, witnessing this apocalyptic scene unfolding from his small boat, is struck with pure, unadulterated terror. In that critical instant, rather than aiding the god who protects the cosmos, he thinks only of his own survival. As Thor raises his hammer for the death blow, Hymir lunges forward and severs the fishing line. With a sound like a mountain collapsing into the sea, the Midgard serpent sinks back into the depths, freed from the hook, its escape ensured by the cowardice of a single giant. Enraged, Thor lets out a roar that echoes across the waves and strikes Hymir so hard with his fist that the giant tumbles overboard into the icy water, a fitting punishment for his catastrophic interference. This myth operates on several profound levels. On the surface, it is a fantastic adventure story, a classic tale of the strongman hero going fishing for the biggest catch imaginable. It showcases Thor's defining characteristics, his immense physical power, his blunt courage, and his unwavering role as the defender of Midgard. But its deeper meaning is woven into the very fabric of Norse cosmology. The struggle between Thor and the Midgard serpent is not a one-time event. It is a symbolic representation of the eternal, daily struggle between order and chaos. The gods of Asgard are not all-powerful creators who defeated evil once and for all. They are custodians of order, constantly vigilant, constantly fighting to hold back the forces of entropy and destruction that threaten to unravel creation itself. Thor's near victory is a promise that order can prevail, but his ultimate failure to land the serpent is a grim reminder that the struggle is perpetual, and the outcome of the final battle, Ragnarok, is never certain. In the Norse worldview, this final battle is prophesied, and it is in that ultimate confrontation that Thor and Jormungandr are destined to meet for the last time. During Ragnarok, the two arch-enemies will face each other on the field of Vigridr. Thor will finally succeed in killing the monstrous serpent, striking it down with Mjolnir. But the victory will be Pyrrhic. As the serpent dies, it will unleash a final, toxic breath, and Thor, exposed to the venom, will take 9 steps before collapsing dead. Their fates are inextricably and tragically linked, two opposing forces that create and destroy each other in the same moment. The fishing trip is a preview of this ultimate doom, a fleeting glimpse of a victory that was almost won, only to be lost until the final, fatal confrontation. It is a story that captures the Norse spirit perfectly, an acknowledgement of a harsh and often tragic universe, met not with despair but with brave, thunderous defiance. If you thought Thor's fishing trip was a wild showdown, just wait until you hear the one where he had to wear a wedding dress. In the pantheon of Norse myths, which often deal with fate, doom, and cosmic battles, the story of the theft of Mjolnir stands out as a glorious, hilarious outlier, a divine comedy of errors that showcases the Norse gods' capacity for cunning, cross-dressing, and sheer, unadulterated farce when their backs are against the wall. Our tale begins with a moment of sheer panic in Asgard. Thor awakens one morning to find his legendary hammer, Mjolnir, missing. This is not a simple case of misplacing one's car keys. For the Norse gods, Mjolnir is the ultimate symbol of protection. It is the weapon they rely on to keep the giants at bay and maintain the order of the cosmos. Without it, Asgard is utterly vulnerable, and the gods are thrown into a state of collective paralysis. The mighty Thor, usually a bastion of blustering confidence, is reduced to a state of despair, frantically tearing his haul apart. He immediately turns to the one god he knows is both savvy enough and shameless enough to help, Loki the trickster. striking a deal with the goddess Freyja, Loki borrows her magical falcon cloak, a garment that allows the wearer to fly between worlds. He transforms into a bird and soars out of Asgard, scanning the 9 realms for any sign of the missing hammer. His search leads him directly to the hall of a giant named Thrym, who is lounging on a burial mound, preening his horse's manes and looking incredibly pleased with himself. With a smug grin, the giant doesn't even try to deny it. He confesses that he is indeed the thief who stole Mjolnir, and he has hidden it 8 leagues beneath the earth where no one will ever find it. But he offers a deal. He will return the hammer on one condition. He demands the beautiful goddess Freyja as his bride. Loki, ever the quick-thinking negotiator, doesn't argue. He simply flies back to Asgard to deliver the giant's outrageous ultimatum. The assembly of gods is horrified. The demand is an utter impossibility. Freyja, the goddess of love, beauty, and crucially fierce independence, is absolutely enraged. Her reaction is one of the most famous moments in all of Norse literature. When the demand is presented to her, her fury is so immense that the very hall of the gods shakes, and the precious necklace of the brisings, which she always wears, shatters from the force of her anger. She refuses point blank, making it abundantly clear that she would never, under any circumstances, consent to become a giant's wife. The gods are right back where they started, defenseless, and now facing an impossible political dilemma. It is at this moment of absolute deadlock that the god Heimdall, the ever-watchful guardian of the Bifrost Bridge, proposes a solution so audacious, so ridiculous that it just might work. His plan is simple. Since Thrym wants a bride, we shall give him one, but it will not be Freyja. Instead, Thor himself will dress as the bride, with Loki disguised as his clever bridesmaid. They will travel to Jotunheim, fool the giant into handing over the hammer as a wedding gift, and then Thor can reveal himself and beat every giant in the hall into a pulp. The sheer absurdity of the plan is staggering. Thor, the hyper-masculine god of thunder, with his red beard and famed appetite, is the least bride-like being in all the cosmos. His initial reaction is one of utter indignation. He argues that if he agrees to this, the other gods will forever think him unmanly and effeminate. But Loki, the master of persuasion, counters with cold, hard logic. He reminds Thor that without the hammer, the giants will soon overrun Asgard and make it their own. The stakes are nothing less than the survival of their entire world. Faced with this grim reality, Thor reluctantly consents to the charade. The preparation scene that follows is pure comedic genius. The gods frantically set about transforming their champion into a convincing, blushing bride. They dress Thor in Freyja's finest gown and adorn him with her most precious jewels. They stuff a woman's traditional headdress onto his head, attempting to hide his famous features. To conceal his muscular warrior's physique and his telltale red beard, they drape him with a long, voluminous veil. They even hang the necklace of the brisings around his neck, having presumably repaired it after Freyja's earlier outburst. Loki, ever the committed actor, dons the attire of a handmaiden to complete the disguise. The two gods then climb into Thor's goat-drawn chariot and rumble their way toward Thrym's hall in Jotunheim, the very picture of a bizarre and terrifying wedding procession. The wedding feast itself is a masterclass in suspense and slapstick. Thrym is overjoyed to see his bride arrive and leads them to the banquet table. The comedy instantly escalates as Thor, playing wildly against type, proceeds to break every single convention of delicate feminine behavior. When the giant lays out a grand feast before them, Thor alone devours an entire ox, 8 whole salmon, and all the delicacies prepared for the women, washing it all down with 3 entire casks of mead. A stunned Thrym looks on, and Loki, in his role as the quick-witted bridesmaid, has to think fast. He leans over and whispers to the giant that his lady has been so lovesick and eager to arrive in Jotunheim that she hasn't eaten a bite for 8 full days. This explanation delights the love-struck Thrym, who is so overcome with passion that he leans in to steal a kiss from under his bride's veil. When he pulls back the veil, he is met not with the delicate features of Freyja, but with the burning, rage-filled eyes of the thunder god glaring back at him with the intensity of 1,000 suns. Once again, Loki smoothly intervenes, explaining that his lady's fierce gaze is simply due to her lack of sleep, again caused by her overwhelming excitement for the wedding. Completely fooled by these excuses, the thoroughly besotted Thrym decides it is time for the wedding ceremony to proceed. He calls for the sacred hammer, Mjolnir, to be brought forth and placed on the bride's lap to hallow their union, as was the custom. This is the moment they have been waiting for. As the hammer is laid upon Thor's knees, the god's fingers close around the familiar handle. In an instant, the veil is thrown off, the dress is straining at the seams, and the furious, fully armed god of thunder rises from his seat. What follows is not a wedding, but a slaughter. Thrym is the first to die, struck down by his own bride's hammer. Thor and Loki then proceed to kill every single giant in the hall, Thrym's entire family, and all his wedding guests, cleansing the place with the very thunder they came to retrieve. They return to Asgard not just victorious, but having turned their enemy's own wedding into a massacre. The brilliance of this myth lies in its subversion of expectations. In a culture that prized martial strength and uncompromising masculinity above almost all else, the ultimate hero is forced to achieve victory not through direct force, but through deception, disguise, and the temporary abandonment of his traditional gender role. It's a story that acknowledges that sometimes brute strength is not enough. Cunning and a willingness to adapt are the true keys to survival. Furthermore, the humor is not just for entertainment. It serves a deeper purpose, humanizing the gods and making them relatable. They aren't just distant, stoic figures of power. They are capable of embarrassment, indignation, and getting themselves into deeply ridiculous situations. This story reminds us that the Norse had a vibrant sense of humor and understood that even in a universe destined for doom and darkness, there is always room for a good, hearty laugh at the expense of a lovesick giant. Yet while Thor's farcical wedding delivers a victory through cunning and disguise, our next story presents a hero on a quest where no amount of cleverness can change the ultimate outcome. This is the epic of Gilgamesh, the world's oldest surviving great work of literature, etched into clay tablets in ancient Mesopotamia over 4,000 years ago. It is a story that asks the most universal and haunting of all human questions. If we must die, what is the meaning of our life? The epic begins not with a humble hero, but with a tyrant. Gilgamesh, the king of the great city of Uruk, is 2/3 god and 1/3 man, a being of superhuman strength, beauty, and energy, but he is also a terrible ruler. He abuses his power, claiming the right to sleep with every new bride on her wedding night and exhausting the city's young men with constant games and battles. The people of Uruk cry out to the gods for relief, and the gods answer in a surprising way. They do not strike Gilgamesh down. Instead, they decide to create his equal, a mirror who will challenge him and absorb his destructive energies. They instruct the goddess Aruru to fashion a wild man from clay, a primitive being named Enkidu. He is covered in shaggy hair, lives among the animals, and knows nothing of civilization. He is nature itself, unleashed to counter Gilgamesh's unchecked culture. The plan works perfectly, but not in the way anyone expected. Enkidu is first discovered by a trapper whose traps he has been freeing. The trapper brings a temple prostitute named Shamhat to the watering hole. She seduces Enkidu, and through their week-long union, he is tamed. The animals, sensing the loss of his innocence, flee from him. Shamhat then leads him to the outskirts of Uruk, where he hears of the king's oppressive ways. Outraged, Enkidu blocks the entrance to a wedding chamber, preventing Gilgamesh from entering. The two mighty beings clash in a titanic battle that shakes the city. They fight until neither can prevail, and in that moment of exhausted stalemate, something miraculous happens. They recognize in each other a kindred spirit, an equal in strength and heart. They drop their arms and embrace, forging a bond of friendship so profound it transforms them both. Gilgamesh's restless energy finds a positive direction, and Enkidu gains a purpose beyond the wilderness. Seeking an adventure worthy of their combined strength, Gilgamesh proposes a quest to travel to the distant cedar forest and slay its monstrous guardian, Humbaba. This is no simple monster hunt. Humbaba was placed there by the god Enlil to protect the sacred trees, and his face is a swirling vortex of intestines, his roar a flood, his breath death itself. Enkidu, who knows the wild, tries to dissuade his friend, warning him of the incredible danger. But Gilgamesh is undeterred, driven by a desire for fame that will outlive his mortal body. The journey is long and terrifying, but together they succeed. With the help of the sun god Shamash, who blinds Humbaba with 13 powerful winds, they corner the monster. In a poignant moment, Humbaba begs for his life, but the heroes, perhaps fearing his power or committed to their goal, behead him. They return to Uruk as triumphant heroes, having achieved the impossible. But in killing a divine guardian, they have also committed a terrible sacrilege, and the gods must now balance the scales. The retribution falls not on Gilgamesh but on Enkidu. He falls gravely ill, cursed by the gods for his part in Humbaba's death. For 12 agonizing days he suffers, describing to Gilgamesh a terrifying vision of the underworld, a bleak and joyless place where the dead live in darkness, eating dust and clay. Gilgamesh is helpless, forced to watch his other half wither away. When Enkidu finally dies, Gilgamesh is utterly shattered. He does not just mourn, he is consumed by a raw, primal terror. If a mighty being like Enkidu can be reduced to clay, then so can he. For the first time, Gilgamesh truly understands his own mortality, and the knowledge unravels him. This triggers the second, more profound half of the epic, Gilgamesh's desperate, obsessive quest for immortality. He abandons his throne, tears his clothes, and lets his hair grow matted like a wild animal's. He wanders the wilderness, tormented by the fear of death, determined to find the one man who is said to have cheated mortality, Utnapishtim, the survivor of the Great Flood, who was granted eternal life by the gods. Gilgamesh's journey to find him is a metaphor for the human struggle against the inevitable. He battles lions and scorpion men, traverses a tunnel where the sun travels through the underworld, and finally arrives at the shores of a great ocean that separates him from his goal. There he meets the tavern keeper Siguri, who offers him the first piece of wisdom. He cannot change his fate, so he should enjoy the simple pleasures of life, a good meal, clean clothes, the love of his child and wife. But Gilgamesh, blinded by his grief and fear, cannot hear her. He must press on. With the help of the ferryman Urshanabi, Gilgamesh crosses the waters of death and finally stands before the ancient Utnapishtim. He expects to learn a secret, a trick, a formula for eternal life. Instead, Utnapishtim tells him the story of the flood, revealing that his own immortality was a unique, one-time gift from the gods for surviving the deluge. There is no secret to be learned because mortality is the defining condition of humanity, the very price the gods set for our existence. To drive the point home, Utnapishtim sets Gilgamesh a test. If he truly wants immortality, he must first conquer sleep. For 6 days and 7 nights he must stay awake, but the exhausted king fails immediately, falling into a deep slumber that proves he cannot even master sleep, let alone death. As a final gesture of pity, Utnapishtim's wife persuades her husband to tell Gilgamesh about a magical plant that grows at the bottom of the ocean, a plant that can restore a man's youth. Though it does not grant immortality, it offers a kind of renewal. Hope flares again in Gilgamesh's heart. He ties stones to his feet, dives into the abyss, and retrieves the thorny plant. He is elated, planning to take it back to Uruk to share with the elders and test on an old man first. But on his journey home, while he stops to bathe in a cool pool, a snake is drawn to the plant's sweet scent and steals it. As the snake slithers away, it immediately sheds its skin, being renewed, while Gilgamesh is left sitting on the shore, weeping. He has come to the very end of the earth, faced every danger, and retrieved the prize, only to have it stolen at the last moment by the most mundane of creatures. It is the final, cruelest lesson. The quest for physical immortality is not just difficult, it is utterly futile. Gilgamesh returns to the walls of Uruk a changed man. The ferryman Urshanabi urges him to behold his city, to look upon its mighty foundations and exquisite brickwork, and in that moment Gilgamesh finally understands. He has been searching for eternal life in the wrong place. He will not live forever in his body, but he can achieve a different kind of immortality through his legacy. The enduring city he built, the story of his adventures with Enkidu, the tale of his profound grief and his journey to the ends of the earth, these will be his monuments. The epic ends where it began, with a description of the strong walls of Uruk, but now they are not just a setting for a tyrant's reign, they are a symbol of what humanity can achieve. We are mortal, and that is what gives our works their meaning. Our friendships, our cities, our stories, these are how we touch eternity. Gilgamesh's quest did not fail. It simply revealed that the answer was there all along, not in a magical plant at the edge of the world, but in the very work of his own hands and the love he carried for his friend. From the epic search for immortality in Mesopotamia, we now travel to the banks of the Nile, where a story of love, betrayal, and magical rebirth provided the very spiritual foundation for one of history's greatest civilizations. This is the profound and deeply moving myth of Isis and Osiris, a tale that explains the Egyptian understanding of life, death, and the divine right of kings. In the time before the pharaohs, the gods themselves ruled Egypt. The wise and benevolent Osiris, the first king, was beloved by all. He taught humanity the arts of agriculture, established laws, and brought civilization to the Nile Valley. His queen and sister, the powerful goddess Isis, was his perfect partner, a mistress of magic and devotion. But their success bred a poisonous envy in the heart of their brother, Set, the god of chaos, deserts, and storms. Set was a force of raw, untamable power, and he watched with growing resentment as the people worshipped his brother. He coveted the throne and desired Isis for himself, and he began to plot a treachery so complete it would shatter the world. Set's plan was as cunning as it was cruel. He hosted a great feast in Osiris's honor. During the celebrations, he presented a beautifully adorned chest crafted to exact measurements. With a show of playful generosity, Set declared that whoever fit perfectly inside this chest could keep it as a gift. One by one, the guests tried and failed. Finally, the unsuspecting Osiris, encouraged by the crowd, lay down inside it. The fit was perfect. In that instant, Set's accomplices slammed the lid shut, nailed it fast, and sealed it with molten lead. They carried the chest, now a sarcophagus with a living god inside, to the Nile and hurled it into the waters where the current carried it out to the great green sea. Osiris, the god of life and fertility, drowned, and with his death, the land itself began to wither and fall into disorder under Set's violent rule. But Isis refused to accept this fate. Her grief was immense, but it was channeled into a relentless, world-spanning quest. She cut her hair, tore her robes, and set out to find the body of her husband. She wandered the length of Egypt, searching for any trace, questioning everyone she met. Her journey took her to the Phoenician coast, where she learned the chest had washed ashore in the city of Byblos and become entangled in the roots of a mighty tamarisk tree. The tree had grown so magnificent and fragrant that the local king had it cut down and used as a pillar to support the roof of his palace. Isis, in disguise, entered the royal household and became the nursemaid to the queen's infant son. Each night, in secret, she would hold the child in the hearth fire to burn away his mortal parts and grant him immortality. When the queen discovered this and screamed in terror, Isis was forced to reveal her true divine nature. She demanded the pillar, and from within it she retrieved the chest containing her beloved Osiris. she brought the chest back to Egypt, hiding it in the dense marshes of the Nile Delta to mourn in private and perform the rites to restore him. But Set, hunting by the light of the full moon, discovered the chest. Enraged, he unleashed his final, most horrific act of desecration. He tore the body of Osiris into 14 pieces and scattered them the length and breadth of Egypt, ensuring he could never be whole again. A lesser spirit would have surrendered to despair, not Isis. With her sister Nephthys and aided by the jackal-headed god Anubis, she embarked on a second, even more grueling quest. They searched every nome, every province for the scattered parts of the god. One by one, they recovered them all except for his phallus, which had been eaten by a Nile fish. Using her profound magic and with the help of Anubis, who invented the art of mummification for this very purpose, Isis reassembled the body. She fashioned a replacement from gold and ebony, and then, transforming herself into a bird, she hovered over his reconstructed form. Beating her wings, she breathed the breath of life back into him just long enough to conceive their son, the heir who would avenge him, the falcon god Horus. This miraculous conception is the heart of the myth's power. Osiris could not return to the land of the living. His resurrection was not a return to his old kingdom, but a transformation. He descended to rule the Duat, the underworld, becoming the lord of the dead and the judge of souls. His rebirth was eternal, but it was in the next world. The fight for this world now fell to his posthumous son, Horus. The boy was raised in secret in the marshes, protected by his mother's magic from Set's relentless attempts to find and kill him. When he came of age, Horus brought his case before the Council of the Gods, the Aeneid, demanding his father's throne. What followed was an epic 80-year struggle, a divine courtroom drama intertwined with violent battles. Set and Horus fought in many forms, and in one brutal clash, Set tore out Horus's left eye, while Horus emasculated Set. The conflict represented the eternal struggle between order and chaos, the fertile black land of the Nile versus the surrounding red desert. The resolution came from the wisdom of other deities. The restored eye of Horus, which became the powerful symbol known as the Wedjat, was offered to his father Osiris in the underworld, a symbol of sacrifice and healing that helped sustain him in his eternal reign. Finally, the sun god Ra, or in some versions the god of wisdom Thoth, declared Horus the rightful ruler of the living world. Set was defeated but not destroyed, as chaos is a perpetual force that can never be fully eliminated, only contained. This myth was the absolute bedrock of Egyptian pharaonic ideology. Every single pharaoh was Horus, the living god on earth, the rightful heir defending the land from chaos. When he died, he became Osiris, the lord of the afterlife, and his son who succeeded him became the new Horus. This created an unbroken chain of divine legitimacy stretching back to the first time. It also provided a powerful blueprint for the promise of resurrection available to all Egyptians. Just as Osiris was pieced together and restored, so too could every person be made whole in the afterlife through proper mummification and funerary rites. The story of Isis's devotion offered hope that love and magic could triumph over even the most final of separations, ensuring that death was not an end, but a transformation into a new and eternal form of existence. Yet the story did not end with the miraculous resurrection of Osiris or even the miraculous conception of Horus. In many ways, that was only the prelude to the true epicenter of the drama, a conflict that would span 80 years and pit God against God in a battle of wits, strength, and legal maneuvering. The question of who now had the right to rule Egypt, the murderous uncle Set, who held the throne by force, or the posthumous son Horus, the rightful heir, could not be settled by a simple battle. This was a matter of cosmic law and divine precedent, and so the issue was brought before the Aeneid, the council of the 9 great gods, presided over by the sun god Ra himself. What followed was not a swift trial, but the contendings of Horus and Set, a sprawling, chaotic, and often shockingly humorous divine courtroom drama that played out over generations. The council was deeply divided from the very start. The elder gods, led by Ra, were often sympathetic to Set. Their reasoning was rooted in a primitive, almost brutal concept of power. Set was strong, a mighty warrior, and had proven his strength by defeating Osiris. In a world constantly threatened by chaos, perhaps a powerful and ruthless king was needed to maintain order. The younger gods, however, overwhelmingly supported the claim of Horus, arguing for the principle of lineal succession, that the son should rightfully inherit his father's office. This fundamental split turned the divine assembly into a political battleground, with debates that raged for years without resolution. The proceedings were anything but orderly. At one point, the baboon god Bab-I insulted Ra so grievously that the sun god went and sat in his tent in a sulk, refusing to participate until the goddess Hathor came and flashed him, lifting his spirits in the most literal way imaginable. This moment alone reveals the uniquely earthy and human nature of Egyptian mythology. The gods were not remote, perfect beings, but embodiments of powerful, often flawed forces. Into this chaotic legal stalemate stepped the single most formidable intellect in the pantheon, Isis. Barred from the proceedings because the gods feared her powerful magic and persuasive tongue, she did not simply accept the ruling. She decided to take matters into her own hands and force a judgment. Disguising herself as a frail, grieving old widow, she approached the divine tribunal as it was ferrying across the Nile. She captivated the gods with a heartbreaking parable about a wicked herdsman who had stolen her son's inheritance of cattle after her husband's death, a story that mirrored her own situation exactly. The gods, moved by her story, unanimously declared that the son's inheritance should be restored to him. At that moment, Isis revealed her true form, triumphantly throwing off her disguise and shaming the gods for being so willing to grant justice to a random widow while denying it to their own sister, the wife of Osiris. The gods were trapped by their own pronouncement, and Ra himself was so enraged at being outwitted that he cursed her with a fury that shook the heavens. But Isis's cleverness did not stop there. In another infamous episode, she used her sexuality as a weapon. She lured Set into a vulnerable moment and then orchestrated a situation where the powerful god accidentally condemned himself out of his own mouth, admitting that a son should indeed inherit from his father. Yet still, the stalemate continued. The frustrated gods eventually sought outside counsel, writing to the distant and immensely wise mother goddess Neith. Her reply was unequivocal. The office should go to Horus. However, perhaps to appease Set's supporters, she suggested compensating Set with gifts, including the foreign goddesses Anat and Astarte as wives. This attempt at a political compromise satisfied no one. The conflict escalated from the courtroom to physical trials of strength. The two rivals were transformed into hippopotamuses and challenged to see who could remain submerged underwater the longest, a test of endurance that Isis attempted to decide by hurling a harpoon into the fray. She struck Set first, but when he cried out and appealed to her as his sister, her familial loyalty made her relent and she pulled the harpoon out. She then struck Horus, but when he made a similar plea as her son, she freed him as well. Her actions so infuriated the gods that they decided to reconvene on a neutral island and forbade Isis from attending. Never one to be stopped by a simple rule, Isis transformed herself into an old woman and bribed the ferryman to take her across. She then found Set, who was resting under a tree, and tricked him into once again condemning himself, arguing that the ferryman should be punished for disobeying the god's orders by bringing the old woman across. When Set declared that the ferryman should be punished for helping her, Isis revealed herself, proving to the entire council that Set himself had just argued that rules should be upheld and lawbreakers punished, thereby undermining his own claim to a throne he seized through the ultimate transgression. The final, most bizarre, and most decisive confrontation saw Set attempt to discredit Horus by humiliating him. In a crude and violent act, Set violated the younger god. But Horus outsmarted him yet again. He caught Set's semen in his hands while ensuring his own seed was secretly introduced into Set's favorite food, lettuce. When the gods called upon the semen of each to speak and declare its owner's dominance, Set's voice called out from the marsh where Horus had dumped it, while Horus's voice called out triumphantly from inside Set's own belly. This final, magical proof of Horus's superiority and Set's deceit forced even the most stubborn of the elder gods, including Ra, to concede. Horus was declared the rightful ruler of the living world, the true king of Egypt. Set was defeated, though not destroyed, for chaos is an eternal force that can never be fully eradicated, only subdued and managed. The resolution of this epic contention was far more than a simple victory for good over evil. It represented the ultimate triumph of mad cosmic order, truth, and justice over Isfet or chaos. It established the fundamental principle of Egyptian kingship for 3,000 years, that the rightful pharaoh was the living embodiment of Horus, the legitimate heir. When that pharaoh died, he became Osiris, the ruler of the blessed dead, and his son who took the throne became the new Horus, continuing the unbroken, divinely sanctioned cycle. The wild, 80-year courtroom drama, with all its trickery, passion, and divine fallibility, was the mythological foundation for the entire Egyptian state, a story that explained not just who should rule, but why their rule was sacred and how the very order of the universe depended on it. But if the story of Osiris and Horus is about the political and legal establishment of order, then the myth of Ra and Apophis is about the daily, physical labor required to maintain it. It is a story that unfolds not over years, but over every single night of eternity, a relentless and exhausting ritual upon which the fate of all creation depends. After his long day crossing the sky, the aged sun god Ra does not simply rest. His most dangerous work is just beginning. As the sun sets in the west, he enters the realm of the Juat, the Egyptian underworld, to begin his perilous 12-hour journey through the 12 gates of the night, a voyage he must complete to be reborn at dawn. This journey is anything but a peaceful cruise. The underworld river is treacherous, filled with sandbanks and hostile spirits. Ra's bark, known as the Manjet, is a vessel of immense power crewed by a host of deities. The god of wisdom, Thoth, is there as his navigator and scribe. The warrior goddess Sekhmet stands ready with her arrows. The mighty god Set, having been given a role after his defeat by Horus, uses his brute strength to defend the boat from the ultimate enemy. And that enemy is always waiting, for coiled in the darkest depths of the river, lurking in the perpetual void, is Apophis, the great serpent of chaos. Apophis is not a god to be worshipped or reasoned with. He is a primeval force of pure negation, a being of such immense malice that his only desire is to uncreate reality itself. He represents Isfet, the total opposite of Maat, a return to the formless, watery chaos that existed before creation. His goal on every nightly journey is singular and terrifying, to devour Ra and stop the sun from rising ever again. He does not attack with strategy or cunning, but with overwhelming, coiling force, attempting to swallow the solar bark whole or, in some versions, to stop its progress by drinking the entire river dry. The confrontation is never a final victory, but an eternal stalemate. Ra and his divine crew must fight him off night after night, using every weapon at their disposal. Set, in his role as defender, harpoons the serpent and holds him at bay. The magician god Isis, who is also aboard, recites powerful spells that cause Apophis to lose his own strength, uncoiling his massive body. Other gods surround him with a chain of magical words that bind him, and then they proceed to dismember him with knives. The ritual is precise and violent. Yet the myth is very clear: Apophis can never be truly destroyed. To kill chaos would be to eliminate the very concept of non-existence, which is an impossibility. He can only be subdued, beaten back, and contained for another day. This was more than a thrilling story. It was a cosmological principle that the Egyptians participated in directly. Priests in temples across Egypt performed daily rituals known as the breaking of Apophis. They would make figures of the serpent out of wax or draw his image on pieces of papyrus, and then they would curse them, spit on them, stab them with knives, and burn them in a fire. These sympathetic magic rites were believed to actively aid Ra in his nightly struggle. By ritually destroying the serpent's effigy on earth, they were weakening the real Apophis in the Duat, ensuring the sun god's victory and the sunrise. This practice reveals a profound and active relationship between humanity and the divine. People were not mere spectators to the cosmic drama. They were essential crew members on the solar bark, their rituals providing the magical support needed to keep the universe running. The enduring power of this myth lies in its stark, simple truth. It presents a universe that is not inherently stable, but one that requires constant, vigorous maintenance. Order is not the default state of the world. It is a fragile achievement, hard-won each day and threatened each night. The daily sunrise, which we so often take for granted, was for the Egyptians the ultimate sign of a successful cosmic struggle. Every dawn was a victory, a collective sigh of relief that the forces of order had, once again, held the line against the endless, pressing void. It is a story that finds echoes in our own lives, in our own daily struggles against our personal chaos, reminding us that the light we count on is not a given, but a prize that must be fiercely and relentlessly defended. While the gods battled serpents of chaos and fought for cosmic order, one mortal king in Greece believed he was cunning enough to outwit the universe's most fundamental law, the necessity of death itself. This is the story of Sisyphus, the legendary founder and king of Corinth, a man whose brilliant, audacious deceit was matched only by the sheer scale of his divine punishment, a punishment that has become the ultimate symbol of life's most frustrating and seemingly pointless struggles. Sisyphus's troubles began with a terrible secret. He had witnessed the god Zeus himself carrying off the nymph Aegina, the daughter of the river god Asopus. When a desperate Asopus came to Corinth searching for his missing daughter, Sisyphus saw an opportunity. He agreed to reveal the kidnapper's identity, but only on the condition that Asopus provide the citadel of Corinth with a permanent, miraculous spring of fresh water. The river god agreed, and Sisyphus named Zeus as the culprit. This was an act of breathtaking hubris. Sisyphus had traded a divine secret for a civic utility, and in doing so, he had made a powerful and vengeful enemy in the king of the gods. Zeus could not let this betrayal stand, and he dispatched Thanatos, the personification of death himself, to chain Sisyphus and drag his soul down to the underworld. But when Thanatos arrived at the palace in Corinth, Sisyphus was ready. He pretended to be fascinated by the heavy chains the god of death carried, asking Thanatos to demonstrate how they worked. The dutiful, perhaps overly literal, death obliged, shackling himself to show the mechanism. In that instant, Sisyphus seized his chance, leaving Thanatos imprisoned in his own chains and locking him in a storage closet. With death himself bound and neutralized, a bizarre era began on Earth. No one could die. Warriors fought on battlefields, run through with spears but unable to succumb to their wounds. The elderly suffered endlessly, trapped in their aging bodies. The natural order was thrown into complete chaos, and the gods were not pleased. This state of affairs continued until the mighty war god Ares, who found his battlefields rather unsatisfying without the finality of death, finally stormed into Corinth, freed Thanatos, and delivered the now helpless Sisyphus straight to the underworld. Yet, even in death, Sisyphus's cunning was not exhausted. Before his capture, he had given his wife, Merope, a strange and specific instruction. Upon his death, she was to cast his unburied body into the public square and refuse to perform any of the traditional funeral rites. Once in the underworld, Sisyphus went directly before its rulers, Hades and Persephone. He presented himself not as a defiant king, but as a deeply wronged and aggrieved husband. He complained that his wife had shown him the utmost disrespect by denying him a proper burial, making him an unfit shade in their realm. He humbly requested permission to return to the world of the living for just 3 days, only long enough to chastise his neglectful wife, arrange his own proper funeral, and restore his honor. The Lord and Lady of the Dead, perhaps moved by his plea or simply unfamiliar with the depths of human guile, granted his request, of course. The moment Sisyphus breathed the air of the living world again and saw the sunlight, he abandoned all thought of funerals. He simply returned to his palace, sat down at his table, and resumed his life as if nothing had happened. He had successfully cheated death not once but twice. His second life was, of course, short-lived. The gods do not take kindly to being made fools of twice. Hermes, the messenger god, was swiftly sent to personally drag the laughing king back to the underworld, this time for good. His punishment had to be uniquely fitting for a man who had dedicated his existence to subverting the natural order through clever tricks. The sentence was eternal, futile labor. Sisyphus was condemned to roll an immense, heavy boulder up a steep hill in the depths of Hades. Just as he would nearly reach the summit, his muscles straining and his hope at its peak, the boulder would inevitably slip from his grasp and roll all the way back down to the bottom. He would then have to trudge down after it and begin the entire agonizing process again for all of time. For centuries, this myth was understood as the ultimate cautionary tale about the price of hubris, the dangers of overreaching pride and defiance of the gods. Sisyphus was the archetypal trickster who went too far, and his punishment was a perfect representation of a meaningless, repetitive, and hopeless existence. That was until the 20th century French philosopher Albert Camus reimagined Sisyphus in his famous 1942 essay, The Myth of Sisyphus. Camus saw Sisyphus not as a tragic fool, but as the ultimate absurd hero. Camus defined the absurd as the fundamental conflict between our human desire for meaning, clarity, and purpose, and the universe's silent, indifferent refusal to provide any. We are born asking why, and the cosmos answers with nothing but silence. In this bleak framework, Sisyphus's punishment is the most potent symbol of the human condition. We all push our boulders every day. We go to jobs that feel repetitive. We engage in tasks that seem to have no lasting impact. We struggle against forces that seem to reset our progress every single morning. According to Camus, the crucial moment in the myth is not the pushing of the rock, but the brief pause as Sisyphus walks back down the hill to retrieve it. In that moment of descent, he is conscious. He is fully aware of the hopelessness of his task. He understands the utter futility of his existence. This consciousness is simultaneously his torture and his victory. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart, Camus writes. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Camus argues that Sisyphus finds meaning not in the success of his task, which is impossible, but in his rebellion against its meaninglessness. By acknowledging the absurdity of his situation and continuing anyway, he transcends it. He asserts his own freedom and defines his own purpose in the face of a universe that offers none. His relentless effort, in full knowledge of its pointlessness, is the greatest act of defiance imaginable. This philosophical interpretation transforms Sisyphus from a cautionary figure into an icon of resilience. His story becomes a powerful metaphor for finding personal victory, not in overcoming insurmountable odds, but in the dignity and determination we bring to the struggle itself. It suggests that the only way to confront an indifferent universe is to embrace the struggle, to find joy in the effort, and to be the hero of your own story, even if that story is about rolling a rock for all eternity. Yet even as Sisyphus endures his eternal, conscious struggle against the absurd, another myth from the Greek world presents a very different kind of hero, one whose power lies not in cunning defiance, but in the sheer, heartbreaking beauty of his art. This is the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, a tale that explores the very limits of love and the cruel fragility of second chances, all set to the most tragic melody ever sung. Orpheus was no ordinary musician. He was the son of the muse Calliope and, according to some, the Thracian king Oeagrus, though many whispered his true father was the god Apollo himself, who gifted him a golden lyre. Whoever his parents, his talent was divine. When Orpheus played his lyre and sang, his music held a power that was almost magical. He could charm wild beasts, making lions lie down with lambs. He could coax stones and trees to uproot themselves and follow him, forming dancing rivers of rock and forest. Even the most turbulent rivers would grow calm and change their courses to listen to his song. His art didn't just entertain, it reshaped the very world around him, bending nature itself to its will. His greatest masterpiece, however, was not written for nature but for a woman, the beautiful nymph Eurydice. Their love was immediate and all-consuming, a perfect harmony of two souls. They were married in a joyous ceremony, but their happiness was devastatingly short-lived. On their wedding day, as Eurydice was walking through a meadow with her bridesmaids, she was pursued by Aristeus, a beekeeper and miner god who was struck by her beauty. As she fled from his unwanted advances, she stepped on a venomous snake hidden in the grass. The serpent bit her ankle, and she died in the arms of her new husband almost instantly. The music in Orpheus's world died with her. His songs turned to dirges, his lyre wept notes of pure grief. The world which had once danced for him now stood silent and mourned with him. But Orpheus's love was stronger than his grief, and it drove him to an audacious plan. He would not accept the verdict of death. He decided to do what no living mortal had ever dared. He would descend into the underworld itself, stand before its dread rulers, and use the only weapon he had to win her back, his music. His journey took him to a deep cavern at Taenarum, a gateway to the realm of Hades. He walked a path of shadows past the ghosts of the dead until he reached the bank of the river Styx, where the grim ferryman Charon waited with his skiff. Charon's duty was to only ferry the souls of the dead, and he moved to refuse the living man passage, but Orpheus began to play. His song was so filled with his loss, his love, and his longing that even the heart of the ancient ferryman, which had turned to stone over millennia of thankless labor, was moved. Charon silently took up his oar and ferried the living poet across the black waters. He next faced Cerberus, the monstrous three-headed hound guarding the gates. The beast lunged, all three jaws snapping, but Orpheus played on. His melody weaved a lullaby of such profound sadness that the hellhound's rage subsided. Its heads drooped, its eyes closed, and it lay down to sleep, allowing Orpheus to step over it and into the very throne room of Hades and Persephone. The rulers of the dead sat in cold, silent majesty, surrounded by the pallid shades of the deceased. The very air was heavy with finality. Undaunted, Orpheus knelt and began the most important performance of his life. He sang of his love for Eurydice. He sang of the cruel injustice of her death on their wedding day. He did not demand or threaten, he pleaded. His voice, accompanied by the golden lyre, was so unbearably beautiful, so raw with authentic emotion that it achieved the impossible. The punishments of the damned were temporarily suspended. Ixion's wheel stopped turning, Tantalus's water receded, and his fruit tree lowered its branches. The Danaid's jars were momentarily filled. For the first time in eternity, the halls of the underworld were silent but for a song of love, and even the stone heart of Hades itself was stirred. The Lord of the Dead was not known for his mercy, but even he could not resist the power of such perfect art. Hades and Persephone agreed to release Eurydice. But their agreement came with one non-negotiable condition, a test of faith as simple as it was severe. Eurydice would follow behind Orpheus as he ascended back to the world of the living. But he was forbidden from looking back at her until they had both exited the underworld and were fully bathed in the sunlight. If he turned to look at her even a moment too soon, the deal would be void and she would be lost to him forever. And so began the most agonizing walk in all of mythology. Orpheus led the way, his ears straining for any sound of his wife's footsteps behind him. The path was steep, dark, and fraught with perilous turns. He heard whispers and rustlings, but could not be sure if it was her or the mocking shades. With every step, doubt began to gnaw at him. Was she really there? Had the gods of the dead tricked him? Was her footfall growing fainter? The silence was unbearable. The condition was a psychological masterpiece of torture, pitting his trust in the gods against his all-consuming love and fear. He had to have faith in an invisible promise to believe without the evidence of his own eyes. As he finally neared the exit, a sliver of daylight piercing the oppressive darkness, his resolve shattered. He could not bear the uncertainty for a moment longer. Just as he crossed the threshold into the upper world, he turned, desperate for the reassurance of her face. In that instant, he saw her not as a solid woman, but as a faint, ethereal form, still within the shadows of the cave. Their eyes met for a heart-wrenching second, filled with love and dawning horror. He had reached the light, but she had not, and because he had broken the condition, the deal was undone. He reached for her, but she was already being pulled back, not in anger, but as an automatic function of the contract. Her form dissolved into the darkness, and this time her final word was not a cry of pain, but a soft, heartbreaking whisper, "Farewell." He tried to follow her back down, to plead his case once more, but the gates were now sealed to him forever. Charon refused, unmoved by his songs a second time. The magic was spent. Orpheus was forced to return to the world alone, a man now twice bereaved. His grief was absolute. He wandered the wilderness for years, shunning all human company. His songs now so unbearably sad that they made the trees weep sap and the rocks tear themselves from the earth in sorrow. He was eventually torn to pieces by a band of Maenads, the frenzied female followers of Dionysus, who were enraged that he would not play his lyre for their wild rites. Even in death, his severed head, thrown into the river Hebrus, was said to have continued singing the name of Eurydice as it floated out to sea. The myth's enduring power lies in its devastating humanity. It is not a story of a hero failing a grand, physical test of strength, but of failing a quiet, internal test of faith. His glance backwards is not an act of stupidity, but one of profoundly relatable love and anxiety. Could any of us in that situation of unbearable tension have resisted the urge to look, to confirm that our greatest hope was real? The story is a poignant exploration of the human condition. Our art can move gods and monsters, but it cannot always conquer our own deepest insecurities. It suggests that some losses are so profound that they can only be endured, never reversed, and that even the most beautiful art is ultimately powerless in the face of the finality of death. Orpheus's song won her a reprieve, but his very human doubt condemned her, creating a tragedy that resonates precisely because his fatal flaw was not hubris but love itself. Yet even as Orpheus's music faded into tragic silence, another hero in Greece was preparing for a quest that would require not the gentle power of song, but the sharp edge of a blade and the cold clarity of a reflected gaze. This is the tale of Perseus, a demigod born from a shower of gold, whose life was defined by a terrible king's impossible demand and a journey to confront the most horrifying creature in all of mythology, the Gorgon Medusa, whose very face could turn a man to stone. The story begins with a prophecy and a king's panic. Acrisius of Argos was told by an oracle that he would be killed by his own grandson. In a desperate attempt to cheat fate, he locked his daughter, Danae, in a subterranean bronze chamber to prevent her from ever marrying or bearing children. But the king of the gods, Zeus, desired Danae, and he found a way. He visited her as a shower of golden rain flowing through the bars of her prison, and from this miraculous union, Perseus was born. When Acrisius discovered the young boy, his fury knew no bounds. Still fearing the prophecy, he refused to kill them directly, as that would incur the wrath of Zeus. Instead, he sealed Danae and the infant Perseus in a wooden chest and cast them out to sea, leaving their fate to the waves. The chest did not sink. It was carried safely to the island of Seriphos, where a fisherman named Dictys hauled it ashore. He took in the stranded mother and child and raised Perseus as his own. As Perseus grew into a strong and brave young man, his mother caught the eye of Dictys' brother, King Polydectes, who ruled the island. Polydectes wanted to marry Danae, but she wanted nothing to do with him, and Perseus was fiercely protective of his mother. Polydectes knew he had to get rid of the young hero to have his way, so he devised a cunning and cruel plan. He announced he was collecting contributions for a wedding gift to marry another woman, Hippodamia. When all the nobles of the island brought expensive gifts, Perseus, proud but poor, had nothing to offer. He stood and declared that he would bring the king any gift he desired, even the head of the Gorgon Medusa. Polydectes, feigning delight, immediately held him to his boast, knowing it was a suicide mission. Medusa was not always a monster. She was once a beautiful maiden, a priestess of Athena, whose most stunning feature was her magnificent hair. But the sea god Poseidon, overcome with desire for her, assaulted her in Athena's own temple. The goddess of wisdom, enraged by this desecration of her sacred space, did not punish Poseidon. Instead, she turned her fury on the victim. She transformed Medusa and her two sisters, Astheno and Uriel, into the dreaded Gorgons. Their faces became so horrifying that any living thing that looked upon them would be instantly petrified. Their hair became a writhing nest of venomous snakes, their hands were tipped with brass claws, and they had wings of gold. Of the three, only Medusa was mortal, making her the sole target for any would-be hero, though getting close enough to kill her was the ultimate challenge. Realizing the impossibility of his task, the despairing Perseus prayed for help. The gods, who had their own grievances against Medusa, answered. Athena, perhaps feeling a sliver of remorse for her past harshness, appeared to him. She gifted him a highly polished bronze shield, as reflective as a mirror. Hermes, the messenger god, gave him an adamantine sword, sharp enough to cut through anything, and a pair of winged sandals that would allow him to fly. The nymphs provided him with three more crucial items: Hades's cap of invisibility, a magical wallet to contain the severed head, and a curved sickle. With this divine arsenal, Perseus was equipped for his hunt. Guided by the gods, he flew to the ends of the earth, to the remote, grim cave where the Gorgons dwelled, a place surrounded by the petrified statues of men and animals who had made the fatal mistake of looking directly at the sisters. Using the reflection in Athena's shield, Perseus carefully navigated the cave, never looking directly at the monsters. He found the three Gorgons asleep, their serpent hair hissing softly. Hovering above them with his winged sandals, he identified Medusa. Still using the shield as his guide, he positioned himself, drew the adamantine sword, and in one swift, decisive motion, he decapitated her. From the bloody stump of her neck sprang two creatures, the winged horse Pegasus and the giant Chrysaor, fathered by Poseidon even in her monstrous form. The other two Gorgons awoke with a shriek of fury, but Perseus was ready. He donned the cap of invisibility and vanished from their sight, escaping the cave with the gruesome trophy safely sealed in the magical wallet. His journey home, however, was far from over. As he flew over the coast of Ethiopia, he saw a tragic scene far below. A beautiful young woman, Andromeda, was chained naked to a rock by the sea as a sacrifice to a monstrous sea serpent, Cetus. Her mother, Queen Cassiopeia, had foolishly boasted that her daughter's beauty surpassed that of the Nereids, the sea nymphs. To appease the angry sea god Poseidon, the Ethiopians were forced to offer their princess to the monster. Perseus, seeing Andromeda's plight, immediately fell in love. He struck a deal with her desperate parents. He would slay the monster and save their daughter in return for her hand in marriage. When the serpent emerged from the depths, Perseus dove into battle. Using his winged sandals to dart and weave through the air, he harried the beast, striking at it with his sword. In some versions, he simply ends the fight by pulling the Gorgon's head from the wallet and holding it aloft, turning the massive sea monster into a mountain of stone. He freed Andromeda, and after a brief dispute with her original suitor, he took her as his wife, and she would join him on his return to Seriphos. he arrived to find his mother and his foster father Dictys hiding in a temple, fleeing the violent advances of King Polydectes, who had never believed Perseus would return. Marching into the king's palace, Perseus found Polydectes and his courtiers feasting. When the king mocked him and demanded his wedding gift, Perseus held his ground. "You want the Gorgon's head, then have it," he declared. He turned his back, closed his eyes, and raised the head high. Polydectes and his entire court were instantly transformed into a gallery of stone statues, their expressions frozen in their final moments of arrogance and shock. With the tyrant defeated, Perseus gave the throne of Seriphos to the rightful heir, the kind Dictys. He then gave Medusa's head to the goddess Athena, who affixed it to the center of her aegis, a fearsome shield that would petrify her enemies in battle. The story of Perseus is a classic hero's journey, but it stands apart for its emphasis on cleverness and divine aid over raw strength. His victory was not won through a direct fight, but through the intelligent use of tools, the reflective shield, the winged sandals, the cap of invisibility. He is the ultimate instrument of the gods, a hero who succeeds because he is willing to accept help and use his wits. Furthermore, the myth is a deeply unsettling exploration of victim blaming and divine injustice. Medusa's origin as a victim punished for Poseidon's crime adds a layer of profound tragedy to the tale, making Perseus's glorious triumph also feel, in a modern light, uncomfortably like the destruction of a being who never deserved her monstrous fate. It is a story that celebrates the hero's success while simultaneously asking us to remember the tragic cost, reminding us that monsters are not born but made. And so we arrive at one of the most visually stunning and enduringly poignant myths of all, a story that has become synonymous with the dangers of overambition and the heartbreaking fragility of youthful exuberance. This is the tragedy of Icarus, a tale of brilliant invention and catastrophic failure, set against the stark blue canvas of the Aegean sky. Our story begins not with freedom but with imprisonment. The mastermind at its center is the legendary artisan Daedalus, a man whose skill was so profound he was said to rival the gods themselves. He had been living in Athens but was forced to flee to the court of King Minos on Crete after murdering his talented nephew Perdix in a fit of jealous rage. In Crete, his genius was put to its most famous task, the construction of the labyrinth, that impossibly complex maze designed to contain the monstrous Minotaur. Daedalus built it so well that he himself could barely find his way out. For years he served King Minos, but his loyalty was not absolute. When the hero Theseus arrived to slay the Minotaur, Daedalus provided the crucial thread to Princess Ariadne, enabling the hero's escape. When King Minos discovered this betrayal, his wrath was absolute. He could not bring himself to kill such a valuable asset, so he devised a more cunning punishment. He imprisoned Daedalus along with his young son Icarus within the very labyrinth they had helped create, high in a tower where they could look out at the world they were forbidden to join. They were birds in a gilded cage with the key thrown away, but you cannot cage a mind like Daedalus's, gazing out at the sea which was patrolled by Minos's ships and across the land which was guarded by his soldiers. Daedalus realized there was only one direction left to go, up. He observed the birds wheeling in the sky, free to come and go as they pleased, and a magnificent, audacious plan began to form. He would craft wings for himself and his son. They would escape the tyranny of the king by claiming the very domain of the gods. Over weeks and months, he and Icarus collected feathers that fell from seabirds that nested on their tower. They sorted them by size, from the smallest to the longest, patiently building a stockpile. Using wax from discarded honeycomb and thread from their own clothes, Daedalus began to construct 2 pairs of magnificent wings. He carefully fastened the feathers to a wooden frame, starting with the smallest and layering the larger ones over them, replicating the natural wings of a bird. It was a work of sublime engineering, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of impossible odds. As he fitted the final feathers, Daedalus turned to his son with a grave and serious warning. Their escape required not just the wings but perfect discipline in using them. He instructed Icarus on the precise path they must take. Fly the middle course, he warned. If you fly too low, the dampness of the sea spray will weigh down your feathers and you will plunge into the waves. But if you fly too high, he said, his voice heavy with foreboding, the heat of the sun will melt the wax that holds your wings together. You must follow my path exactly. Icarus, buzzing with the excitement of their impending flight, nodded eagerly, but one wonders if he truly heard the gravity in his father's words. The moment of their escape was one of pure, transcendent wonder. They fastened the wings to their arms with straps, took a running start from the highest point of their tower, and leapt into the open air. For a few glorious moments, Daedalus's invention worked perfectly. They beat their wings and felt the incredible sensation of rising, of the world falling away beneath them. The guards in the courtyard below looked up, tiny and insignificant. The ships in the harbor were mere toys on a painted sea. They were free. They soared over the coastline of Crete, leaving the labyrinth and the reign of Minos far behind. Daedalus led the way, constantly checking over his shoulder, ensuring his son was maintaining the crucial middle altitude. But for Icarus, the initial fear was quickly replaced by an intoxicating euphoria. This was more than just escape, it was ecstasy. The feeling of the wind rushing past him, the vastness of the sky, the incredible view, it was a sensation of power and freedom he had never known. He began to experiment, diving playfully toward the waves and then pulling up, laughing as the sea foam tickled his feet. Each successful maneuver filled him with more confidence. He watched his father flying steady and cautious ahead, and a thought began to form. Why be cautious? Why merely fly when he could soar? He looked up at the brilliant, life-giving sun, the great god Helios himself, and felt a pull he could not resist. He wanted to get closer, to touch that divine fire, to achieve something no mortal had ever done. Ignoring his father's frantic shouts, which were carried away on the wind, Icarus began to climb. Higher and higher he rose, each beat of his wings carrying him closer to the heavens. At first, the warmth was pleasant, but soon it became an intense, searing heat. The careful warnings of his father proved devastatingly accurate. The sun's rays softened the wax holding his feathers together. He felt a strange looseness in his left wing, then his right. A single feather detached and spiraled down into the abyss, then another and another. In a matter of seconds, the structure of the wings failed completely. The bonds dissolved, the feathers scattering on the wind like so much dust. The magnificent wings, the product of months of painstaking labor, disintegrated around his arms. The exhilaration of the climb turned to sheer, stomach-dropping terror as he realized he was no longer flying but falling. He flailed his arms, grasping at the empty air where his wings had been, but it was useless. He plummeted down past his horrified father and crashed into the deep blue sea that now bears his name, the Icarian Sea. Daedalus, helpless, could only watch his son disappear beneath the waves. He circled the spot where Icarus had fallen, but there was nothing to be done. He had used his genius to escape a king, but in doing so, he had delivered his own son to a fate far worse. He eventually landed on the nearby island of Sicily, a free man but a broken one. He was said to have hung up his wings in a temple as an offering to the gods, forever haunted by the cost of his invention and the price of his freedom. The myth of Icarus is most commonly understood as a simple, powerful warning against hubris, the dangerous overconfidence that leads to a fall. Icarus, in his youthful arrogance, believed he could transcend the limits set for mortals and paid the ultimate price. But to see it only as a cautionary tale about flying too high is to miss its profound nuance. It is also a story about the delicate balance a parent must strike and the terrifying moment when a child must navigate the world with their own judgment. Daedalus gave Icarus the tools for freedom but could not control how he used them. The myth asks a difficult question. When we grant someone the power to achieve great things, how do we also instill the wisdom to use that power responsibly? Furthermore, the story is not a condemnation of ambition itself, but of a specific, reckless kind of ambition. Daedalus's flight was a success. He reached Sicily safely because he respected the limits of his invention. His ambition was tempered with wisdom and experience. Icarus's ambition was pure, untempered passion, a drive without the anchor of caution. The sea below and the sun above are the two poles of human existence, the mundane, heavy pull of the everyday and the brilliant, burning allure of the extraordinary. The true path, Daedalus knew, was the difficult middle course between them. The story endures because it speaks to a tension within all of us, the desire to reach for the sun, and the terrifying knowledge that our wings, no matter how beautifully crafted, are held together with nothing but wax. Yet where Icarus's story was one of solitary ambition leading to a lonely fall, our next tale is about a quest defined by teamwork, betrayal, and a love that would curdle into one of mythology's most chilling tragedies. This is the epic of Jason and the Argonauts, a voyage that assembled the greatest heroes of Greece for a single, impossible goal, only to reveal that the greatest perils are not monsters or moving mountains, but the treachery of the human heart. The saga begins not on the high seas, but in a palace soaked with familial betrayal. Jason was the rightful heir to the throne of Iolcus, but his power-hungry uncle, Peleus, had seized the crown and murdered Jason's family. The young prince was smuggled away and raised in secret by the wise centaur Chiron. Years later, a now-grown Jason returned to Iolcus to claim his birthright. His arrival was dramatic. He lost a sandal crossing a raging river and thus arrived in the city as a man with one bare foot. This detail was crucial, for Peleus had received a cryptic oracle warning him to beware a man wearing only one sandal. Seeing Jason, Peleus knew he was facing his destined downfall, but the king was too cunning for a direct confrontation. He publicly acknowledged Jason's claim, but set an impossible price for the throne. Jason must first embark on a quest to retrieve the legendary Golden Fleece from the far-off, barbarous land of Colchis. It was a mission Peleus was certain would mean the young hero's death. The Golden Fleece was no mere trophy. It was the skin of a magnificent winged ram that had once saved two children from a wicked stepmother, carrying them through the air to safety. After its sacrifice, its fleece was hung in a sacred grove in Colchis, guarded by a massive, unsleeping dragon. It was a symbol of kingship and authority, and retrieving it would require a crew of legends. Jason, undaunted, had the great ship Argo built, its timber including a speaking beam from the sacred oak of Dodona, giving the vessel the gift of prophecy. He then sent out a call for heroes, and Greece's mightiest answered. The list of Argonauts was a who's who of mythological greatness: the mighty Hercules, the divine musician Orpheus, the swift sons of the north wind, the fierce huntress Atalanta, and the master craftsman Argus, who built the ship. This was not a journey of one man, but a collaborative effort of the age's greatest talents. Their voyage to Colchis was a tour of the ancient world's most surreal and deadly hazards. Their first major challenge set the tone. They came across the aging king Phineus, who was being tormented by the vile harpies. These winged creatures with the faces of hags would swoop down whenever he tried to eat, snatching the food from his hands and defiling the rest with their filth. The Argonauts, led by the winged sons of Boreas, gave chase and drove the monsters away, earning the king's gratitude and, more importantly, his crucial advice for the terror that lay ahead: the Symplegades, or the clashing rocks. These two massive cliffs at the mouth of the Black Sea would crash together with immense force whenever anything tried to pass between them, crushing ships to splinters. Following Phineus's instructions, Jason released a dove. It flew through the narrow strait, and the rocks slammed together, nipping off its tail feathers but allowing it to pass. As the rocks began to recoil for the next clash, the Argo rode with all its might. The speaking beam of the ship cried out encouragement. The heroes strained at their oars, and the vessel shot through the narrow passage just as the cliffs crashed together again, shearing off the Argo's stern ornament but leaving the ship intact. From that day forward, the Symplegades were fixed in place, their magical menace spent. It was a victory of timing, teamwork, and following good counsel. After countless other adventures, they finally reached the kingdom of Colchis and the court of the ruthless King Aeates. When Jason demanded the fleece, Aeates, like Peleus before him, agreed, but only after Jason completed another series of impossible tasks. He had to yoke a pair of fire-breathing bronze bulls, plow a field with them, and then sow the furrows with dragon's teeth, which would instantly sprout into an army of skeletal warriors. It was a certain death sentence. This is where the story takes its fateful turn. The king's daughter, Medea, was a priestess of Hecate and a powerful sorceress in her own right. Smitten with Jason and persuaded by the goddesses Hera and Athena who favored his quest, she agreed to help him in secret, but only on the condition that he swear a solemn oath to take her with him and marry her. Jason eagerly agreed. That night, Medea gave him a magical ointment that made him invulnerable to fire and weapons for a day. She also gave him the strategy to defeat the Sown Men, throw a stone into their midst. The next day, Jason anointed himself and his armor, successfully yoked the bulls, plowed the field, and sowed the teeth. When the armed warriors sprang from the earth, he followed Medea's advice and hurled a large rock into the middle of the host. Not knowing who had thrown it, the warriors turned on each other and fought until not one was left standing. King Aeates was enraged and had no intention of honoring his bargain. To retrieve the fleece itself, Jason needed Medea's help once more. She led him to the sacred grove where the massive dragon coiled around the fleece's oak tree. Using a potion and incantations, she sang a lullaby of such power that she lulled the never-sleeping guardian into a deep slumber. Jason quickly snatched the gleaming golden fleece from the tree, and they fled with the Argonauts back to the Argo, pursued by the king's fleet. Their escape was aided by yet another horrific act. To delay her father's pursuit, Medea abducted her own young brother, Apsyrtus. In some versions, she killed him and dismembered his body, scattering the pieces into the sea, knowing her father would be compelled to stop and collect them for a proper burial. The act was so heinous that it stained the Argo and its crew with a miasma of guilt that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. They returned to Iolcus triumphant, the golden fleece in hand. But the story does not end with a happy homecoming. Peleus still refused to relinquish the throne. Once again, Medea used her dark magic to secure Jason's destiny. She demonstrated her power to Peleus's daughters by slaughtering and dismembering an old ram, then boiling it in a cauldron and bringing it back to life as a young lamb. She promised them the same rejuvenation for their aging father. Trusting her, the daughters horrifically murdered and chopped up Peleus, but Medea left his pieces in the pot, offering no spell to bring him back. Though Jason gained the throne, the people of Iolcus were so horrified by this regicide that they drove the couple into exile. They found refuge in Corinth, and it is here that the final, most devastating act of their tragedy unfolds. After years together and having 2 children, Jason's ambition once again overrode his loyalty. To secure his political position, he decided to cast Medea aside and marry the young princess of Corinth. He justified it with cold logic, telling Medea that it was not love but a strategic move for their security, and that she should be grateful for the years he had given her. This final betrayal unlocked a rage in Medea that made her previous actions seem tame. The woman who had sacrificed everything for him, her home, her family, her innocence, was now to be discarded as an inconvenient foreigner. Feigning acceptance, she sent the new bride a beautifully woven coronet and a dress as a wedding gift, but the garments were poisoned. When the princess put them on, they burst into an unquenchable fire that consumed her and her father as he tried to save her. With her rivals destroyed, Medea faced her ultimate, gut-wrenching decision: To complete her vengeance against Jason, to destroy his lineage and his future, she did the unthinkable. She went into the room where their two young sons were hiding and killed them. As Jason rushed to the scene, he saw her escape in a chariot drawn by dragons, sent by her grandfather, the sun god Helios. She looked down at him from the sky, utterly victorious and utterly damned, leaving him with nothing, no bride, no kingdom, and no children. The man who had achieved the greatest collaborative quest in history was ultimately destroyed by the personal betrayals that defined his character. A hero in the world's eyes, but a villain in his own home, forever broken by the devastating cost of his own ambition. But the story of Jason and Medea, for all its fire and fury, is a sprawling epic of action and consequence. Our next tale, by contrast, is an intimate and quiet tragedy. A story that unfolds not on the high seas or in a bloody palace, but in the serene solitude of a forest pool. This is the myth of Narcissus, a deceptively simple story that has given its name to one of the most profound and puzzling conditions of the human psyche. In the lush, wooded valleys of Boeotia, there lived a youth named Narcissus. He was the son of the river god Cephissus and the nymph Liriope. And from the moment of his birth, it was clear he was blessed with a beauty so extraordinary it was almost divine. But this gift was also his curse. As he grew, his beauty became legendary, drawing admirers of all kinds, both men and women, mortals and immortals. Yet Narcissus remained utterly unmoved, his heart as cold and hard as marble. He met every declaration of love with haughty disdain and cruel rejection, leaving a trail of broken hearts and wounded spirits in his wake. One of these wounded souls was the nymph Echo. She was a talkative, cheerful nymph, a companion of the goddess Hera, until she made a terrible mistake. Zeus, the king of the gods, was notorious for his affairs, and he would often enlist Echo to distract his wife, Hera, with long, entertaining stories while he slipped away. When Hera discovered the deception, her wrath was swift and severe. She punished Echo not by silencing her, but by crippling her power of speech. From that day forward, Echo could no longer speak her own thoughts. She could only repeat the last few words spoken by someone else. She was condemned to be a mere reverberation, a phantom of conversation, forever trapped in the margins of other people's dialogues. It was in this diminished state that Echo encountered Narcissus. She was wandering in the woods when she saw him, separated from his hunting companions. She was immediately captivated by his beauty, her heart swelling with a love as deep as it was hopeless. She longed to speak to him, to tell him how she felt, but she could not form the words herself. She could only follow him, hiding among the trees, waiting for him to speak. When Narcissus, hearing a rustle in the leaves, called out, "Is anyone there?" Echo could only respond, "Anyone there?" He called again, "Come here." And she eagerly repeated, "Come here." She rushed from her hiding place, arms open wide, ready to embrace him. But Narcissus, seeing this strange, repeating nymph running toward him, reacted not with curiosity but with revulsion. He pushed her away with a harsh and final rejection. "I would die before I give you power over me." The broken Echo, who could only ever repeat the endings of things, whispered the last crushing words. "I give you power over me." Humiliated and heartbroken, she retreated into the depths of the forest. Her body, according to the myth, wasted away from grief and unrequited love until nothing was left but her voice, a disembodied sound that still repeats our words in lonely places, a permanent reminder of love scorned. Echo's pain did not go unnoticed. The goddess of vengeance, Nemesis, learned of Narcissus's cold-hearted cruelty and decided his arrogance warranted a very specific punishment. She led him to a secluded, clear pool of water, perfectly still and mirror-like, hidden deep in the woods. Weary from his hunt and feeling thirsty, Narcissus knelt beside the water to take a drink. As he bent over, he saw his own reflection staring back at him. He was instantly mesmerized. He had never seen such breathtaking beauty before. He did not recognize himself. He saw only a flawless, divine being gazing up from the water. In that moment, Nemesis's curse took full hold. He fell deeply, hopelessly in love with the image. He smiled, and it smiled back. He reached out to touch it, and the figure reached for him in return. But every time he tried to embrace or kiss the beautiful youth, the water would ripple and the image would dissolve, only to reform the moment the water grew still again. He whispered words of adoration, "I love you," and heard nothing in return but his own words, perhaps echoed mockingly by the unseen spirit of the nymph he had destroyed. He understood that the object of his desire was unattainable, a mere illusion, but he was powerless to leave. He could not eat or sleep. He could only lie by the pool, fixated on his reflection, slowly wasting away from a love that could never be consummated, trapped in a loop of his own desire. In his final moments of clarity, the terrible truth dawned on him. The heartbreaking realization was not just that he was in love with himself, but that he was the one he was pining for. He was the unattainable love that was destroying him. He wept, and his tears rippled the water, distorting the beautiful face he adored. "I am he finally lamented. "My riches pauper me. Oh, I am so burned by my own fires." With that final, tragic epiphany, he succumbed to his exhaustion and grief, dying there beside the pool that had been his prison. The nymphs prepared his funeral pyre, but when they went to collect his body, they found it gone. In its place, rooted at the water's edge, was a new, pale white flower with a yellow center, its head perpetually bent as if gazing down into the water. They named it the Narcissus, a permanent monument to vanity and self-destruction. The myth operates on several profound levels. On one hand, it is a straightforward moral fable about the dangers of vanity and self-absorption, a warning that excessive pride and a refusal to engage with the world outside oneself leads only to isolation and spiritual death. But to see it only as a simple cautionary tale is to miss its deeper, more unsettling psychological insight. The story brilliantly captures the agony of a specific kind of unrequited love, not love for another person, but love for an idealized image, a perfect illusion that can never love you back. Narcissus isn't just vain, he is trapped in a relationship with a phantom, a two-dimensional representation that offers no warmth, no conversation, no reciprocity. His punishment is to experience the ultimate futility of loving something that is, by its very nature, incapable of loving him in return. This ancient myth provided the perfect name for a modern psychological condition, narcissistic personality disorder. While the clinical diagnosis is complex and should not be simplistically applied to the myth, the core parallel is striking. A grandiose sense of self-importance, a deep need for admiration, and a stunning lack of empathy for others. The myth gives us the powerful image for a person so captivated by their own reflection, whether in a pool or in the adulation of others, that they become blind to the real, living people around them, often causing immense pain, just as Narcissus did to Echo. Yet the story is also deeply compassionate toward its tragic hero. His end is not celebrated but mourned. He is a victim of a divine curse, a beautiful soul destroyed by a fatal flaw he could not control. The myth asks us to consider the prison of self-obsession, a jail where the warden and the prisoner are the same person. It suggests that the most beautiful face can hide the most empty existence, and that the reflection we find so captivating might be the very thing that prevents us from truly connecting and truly living. Meanwhile, on the slopes of Mount Olympus, a very different kind of birth was imminent, one that would bypass childhood entirely and introduce a deity whose very essence was intellect and strategy. The king of the gods, Zeus, had been plagued by a raging, unbearable headache. This was no ordinary pain. It was a cosmic affliction, a pressure building within his divine skull that threatened to crack it open. The source of this agony was a prophecy. Zeus had swallowed his first wife, the Titaness Metis, goddess of cunning wisdom, whole. He had done this because it was foretold that after bearing a daughter, Metis would then bear a son who would be powerful enough to overthrow him, just as he had overthrown his father, Cronus. By consuming Metis, Zeus believed he had absorbed her wisdom and circumvented the prophecy, keeping her and her potentially dangerous offspring contained within him forever. But you cannot so easily contain a force of nature. Metis, though imprisoned, was not idle. Within the mind of Zeus, she began to craft a child. She forged armor and weapons of immense power, and she imbued her daughter with all her own formidable intelligence and strategic genius. The pressure of this creation, of a fully formed goddess being hammered into existence inside his head, became unbearable for Zeus. The pain was so immense that he roared in agony, a sound that shook the foundations of the heavens. He summoned all the gods to witness his suffering, and he demanded that someone, anyone, relieve him of this torment. The other gods hesitated, terrified of striking their king. Finally, the smith god Hephaestus, the master craftsman, stepped forward. Perhaps he acted out of pity, or perhaps he simply understood a problem that required a tool to fix. He took up his mighty bronze axe, a tool normally used to split stubborn logs or shape hot metal, and with one precise, tremendous blow, he cleaved open the skull of the king of the gods. What happened next was not a flow of blood or gore, but a blinding, radiant explosion of pure power. From the fissure in Zeus's head emerged a figure in full battle regalia, a woman already fully grown and armed for war. She was Athena, and her entrance into the world was as shocking and unique as she herself would be. She let out a mighty cry, a resonant shout that was both a war cry and a proclamation of her arrival, and she brandished a spear so sharp it seemed to cut the very air. She was the literal brainchild of Zeus, born not from a mother's womb, but from the mind of the father, making her the undeniable embodiment of his authority and his intellect. The first thing she did was remove her helmet, revealing a face of severe and majestic beauty, her gray eyes gleaming with a wisdom that seemed as ancient as time itself. Athena was immediately welcomed among the Olympians, taking her place as the goddess of wisdom, strategic warfare, and civilized arts. She represented not the blind, brutal rage of Ares, but the calculated, disciplined strategy that wins wars through cleverness and foresight. She became the patron of heroes like Odysseus, favoring those who used their wits as much as their strength. But her most famous act of patronage was reserved for the land of Attica, in a competition that would define a city and a people. The story goes that both Athena and the sea god Poseidon desired to be the patron deity of a magnificent new city. To settle the dispute, they agreed that each would give the city one gift, and the king and people would choose which was more valuable. Poseidon went first. He struck the Acropolis with his trident, and from the rock a magnificent saltwater spring burst forth. It was an impressive display of raw power, promising naval dominance and a connection to the sea. But the water was as salty as the ocean itself, undrinkable and of little practical use. Then it was Athena's turn. She knelt and planted something in the earth. From that spot grew the first olive tree. This was no mere plant, it was a gift of profound and lasting utility. The olive tree provided food, oil for cooking and lamps, and wood for building. Its oil could be used for trade, bringing wealth and prosperity. It was a symbol of peace, cultivation, and civilization itself. The king of the city, Cecrops, and his people recognized the superior value of Athena's gift. It promised not just power, but a sustainable, thriving society. They chose Athena and in her honor named their city Athens. The olive tree became its sacred symbol, and the goddess of wisdom, born from thought itself, watched over its courts, its craftspeople, and its philosophers, forever linking the pursuit of knowledge with the foundation of civic life. While Athena's birth represented the glorious emergence of wisdom and strategy, another story from the mythological world offers a far more cautionary lesson about the unintended consequences of getting exactly what you wish for. This is the unforgettable tale of King Midas, a story that has become the ultimate parable about the dangers of greed and the profound difference between wealth and true riches. Midas was the king of Phrygia, a man who already possessed immense wealth and a powerful kingdom, but whose heart was ruled by a deep and insatiable love for gold. His story begins not with a selfish wish, but with an act of unexpected kindness. The old, satyr-like companion of the god Dionysus, a reveler named Silenus, had wandered away from the god's wild procession and was found drunk and disoriented in the king's famous rose gardens. Instead of punishing or ignoring the strange creature, Midas recognized him and treated him with generous hospitality, welcoming him into his palace for 10 days and nights of feasting before personally escorting him back to Dionysus. The god of wine and ecstasy was so overjoyed and grateful to have his beloved friend returned safely that he offered Midas any reward he desired, swearing by the river Styx to grant whatever he asked. This was the moment of ultimate temptation, a divine blank check. Midas, without a moment's hesitation, made his wish. He asked that everything he touched be turned to gold. To him, it seemed the perfect, foolproof path to becoming the richest man in the world. Dionysus, though he knew it was a terrible request, was bound by his oath. He granted the wish with a heavy heart, warning the king that he would soon come to regret his choice. The first moments of his new power were pure, unadulterated ecstasy. As Midas journeyed back to his palace, he decided to test the gift. He broke off a twig from a low-hanging oak branch. It instantly solidified in his hand, a beautiful, weighty statue of solid gold. He picked up a stone from the path. It shimmered and transformed into a golden nugget. He touched a clod of earth. It became a priceless bar of gold. He was giddy with delight, believing himself the most blessed man to ever live. He arrived home and ordered his servants to prepare a grand feast to celebrate his incredible fortune. He reached out to touch the marble columns of his palace, watching them glint in the sunlight, and he laughed with joy. But as he sat down at his table, his joy quickly curdled into confusion, then horror. He reached for a piece of bread. It hardened into a metallic lump the moment his fingers made contact. He raised a cup of wine to his parched lips. The liquid solidified into a golden syrup that he could not drink. The very sustenance he needed to live was now utterly denied to him. The reality of his curse crashed down upon him. He was the richest man in existence, and he was doomed to starve to death surrounded by inedible treasure. The horror reached its peak when his young daughter, perhaps running to embrace her father or console him in his sudden distress, came into the room. Without thinking, he reached out to her, and in a heart-stopping instant, she was transformed into a lifeless, golden statue, her face frozen in an expression of love and confusion. His greed had not only condemned him to isolation and starvation, but had cost him the thing he loved most in the world. In his despair, Midas finally understood the true poverty of his wish. He cried out to Dionysus, begging for the god to take back his fatal gift. The benevolent god, taking pity on his genuine remorse, told him how to reverse the curse. He must travel to the source of the river Pactolus in the region of Lydia and wash himself clean in its waters. Midas did not hesitate. He journeyed to the river and plunged in, scrubbing his skin and immersing his body. As he did, the power flowed out of him and into the river, washing away his golden touch and, according to the myth, depositing particles of gold into the riverbed sand. From that day forward, the river Pactolus was famous for its gold deposits, a permanent geological reminder of the king's folly and redemption. His daughter and all the things he had accidentally transformed were restored to their original state. The myth's power lies in its stark simplicity and its devastatingly clear moral. It is a story about the fundamental confusion between monetary value and real value. Midas wanted the symbol of wealth, but in doing so, he lost access to the things that actually give life its richness: food, drink, and human connection. His story is a timeless warning that the pursuit of wealth for its own sake is a hollow endeavor that can isolate us from the very world we seek to enjoy. Furthermore, it's a lesson about the danger of poorly considered wishes. Midas did not think through the implications of his desire. He saw only the immediate gain and none of the inevitable costs. His redemption comes not from another wish, but from an act of cleansing and the humility to admit he was wrong. The golden sands of the Pactolus serve as a permanent, tangible metaphor. Wealth taken from the earth can be valuable, but only when it is separate from our own touch, a tool we use and not a power that uses us. Yet even as King Midas washed the curse of gold from his hands in the river Pactolus, learning that true wealth lies not in metal but in life's simple, tangible gifts, another story was unfolding that would explain the most fundamental rhythm of life on Earth itself, the eternal cycle of growth and decay, abundance and barrenness. This is the profound and poignant myth of the abduction of Persephone, a tale that begins with a violent act in a sun-drenched meadow and ends with a delicate compromise that dictates the turning of our world. The story opens not in the gloomy underworld, but in the blissful, idyllic fields of Sicily, where the young goddess Persephone, daughter of the harvest goddess Demeter, was gathering flowers with her companions, the ocean nymphs. The air was sweet with the scent of blossoms, and the world was in a state of perpetual, fertile spring, for her mother's joy was the source of all life on earth. But on this day, the earth yielded a flower unlike any other, a dazzlingly beautiful narcissus planted by the will of Zeus himself as a lure. As Persephone reached to pick this extraordinary bloom, the ground beneath her feet shuddered and split open with a deafening roar. From the chasm emerged Hades, the stern and lonely god of the underworld, riding a chariot of black gold drawn by 4 immortal, jet-black horses. In one swift, brutal motion, he seized the terrified young goddess and dragged her down into the dark depths, the earth ceiling shut above them as if nothing had happened. All that remained was a single, forlorn Narcissus lying in the trampled grass, and the echoing, fading cries of her nymph companions. Persephone's mother, Demeter, heard the echo of that scream from across the world. The goddess of the harvest, whose power sustained all humanity, was instantly consumed by a grief so profound it stopped the world in its tracks. She tore her divine robes, cast a dark veil over her face, and for 9 days and 9 nights she wandered the earth, holding a pair of blazing torches, refusing to eat or drink, searching desperately for her lost daughter. Hecate, the goddess of witchcraft and crossroads, eventually heard of her plight and revealed that she had heard the girl's cries but had not seen the abductor. Together, they went to the all-seeing sun god, Helios, who drives his chariot across the sky and witnesses all things. It was he who told Demeter the terrible truth, that her brother Hades had taken Persephone, and that this act had been sanctioned by the greatest authority of all, Zeus, the king of the gods and Persephone's own father. This betrayal unleashed a wrath in Demeter that was far more terrifying than any mere tantrum. Her grief became a cosmic strike. She abandoned Mount Olympus and wandered the mortal world in the guise of an old woman, arriving in the town of Eleusis. There she was taken in by the royal family and became a nurse to their young son, Demophon. In her divine sorrow, she found a flicker of purpose, and she attempted to grant the baby immortality by anointing him with ambrosia and holding him in the hearth fire each night to burn away his mortal nature. But when the queen discovered this and screamed in terror, Demeter was forced to reveal her true, awesome form. She commanded the people of Eleusis to build her a temple, and from there she declared that her strike would continue. She withdrew her power from the world. The fertile soil turned to dust, seeds refused to sprout, trees shed their leaves and bore no fruit. A bitter, endless winter fell upon the earth. Famine spread and humanity faced utter extinction. The gods received no sacrifices, for the people who would offer them were dying. The very order of the cosmos began to unravel. Faced with this total collapse, Zeus was forced to act. He could not reverse his brother's marriage, for Hades had indeed made Persephone his queen, but he also could not allow all life to perish. He sent a succession of gods to plead with Demeter, but she was immovable. She would not allow a single blade of grass to grow until she saw her daughter with her own eyes. Finally, Zeus sent Hermes, the swift messenger, down to the underworld to negotiate with Hades for Persephone's release. Hades, the rich one, was a strict but not unjust ruler. He understood the crisis, and though he loved his wife, he agreed to let her go. But as Persephone prepared to leave, he offered her a final gift, a single, blood-red pomegranate seed. Knowing that anyone who consumes food in the land of the dead is bound to it forever, Persephone, perhaps out of pity for her lonely husband or perhaps simply overcome by hunger, accepted it and ate the seed. Her return to the surface was a moment of incalculable joy. Demeter rushed from her temple to embrace her daughter as the world held its breath. But in their joyous reunion, Persephone confessed that she had eaten the pomegranate seed. The binding magic had been enacted. A new compromise, negotiated by Zeus himself, was therefore required. For each of the 6 seeds she had consumed, Persephone would spend 1 month of the year as the queen of the underworld beside her husband Hades. The remaining 6 months she could return to the world above and her overjoyed mother. This is the origin of the seasons. When Persephone ascends each spring, Demeter's joy is so complete that she allows the earth to erupt in blossoms, crops, and lush greenery. This is the season of spring and summer. But as the year wanes and the time comes for Persephone to descend back to the underworld, Demeter's grief returns. She withdraws her blessing, the plants wither and die, and the world enters the barren silence of autumn and winter. The myth doesn't just explain a natural cycle, it imbues it with deep emotional and psychological truth. It is a story about the necessary balance between joy and sorrow, presence and absence, life and death. The earth is not barren because a god is cruel, but because a mother grieves. The world is not fertile because of a simple command, but because of a mother's boundless love. The power of this story was so immense that it formed the basis of the Eleusinian mysteries, the most sacred and secret religious rites of ancient Greece. For nearly 2,000 years, initiates would pilgrimage to Eleusis to undergo a ritual reenactment of Demeter's search and Persephone's return. The details were a closely guarded secret, punishable by death to reveal, but we know the rites involved a powerful emotional and spiritual journey through darkness and despair into a blinding, joyful revelation, the promise that life could emerge from death, that the soul could find renewal. The myth and the mysteries it inspired offered something unparalleled in Greek religion, a promise of hope and personal salvation beyond the grave, a direct result of understanding and empathizing with the profound grief and greater joy of a goddess. It transformed a story of violation and trauma into a foundational narrative of cyclical renewal, assuring ancient people that the winter of their lives, both literal and metaphorical, would always be followed by a return of the spring. Yet even in the shadow of such grand, world-altering compromises between gods and goddesses, another kind of confrontation was brewing, one that would pit divine authority against mortal pride in a very different arena. Not a field or a throne room, but the humble space of the weaver's loom. This is the story of Arachne, a tale not of abduction or cosmic cycles, but of artistic hubris and the terrifying price of speaking truth to power through the silent, potent language of thread. In the region of Lydia, there lived a young woman named Arachne. She was not of noble birth, her father was a simple dyer of wool, and their wealth was modest. But Arachne possessed a gift that was nothing short of divine. Her skill at the loom was so breathtaking that nymphs would abandon their groves and streams just to watch her work. It was said that her fingers moved with such grace and speed that they seemed to be guided by the muses themselves. The tapestries she wove were miracles of art. They were not just patterns, they were living stories. Her flowers seemed to exude perfume. Her animals looked ready to leap from the fabric, and her human figures were so real you expected them to speak. And as her fame spread, so did a troubling rumor. People began to whisper that her incredible talent could not possibly be a gift from the goddess Athena, the patron of weaving and crafts. It must be entirely her own, a product of her own genius that surpassed even that of the goddess. When these boasts reached the lofty halls of Mount Olympus, Athena, the gray-eyed goddess of wisdom and crafts, was deeply offended. But she was also a deity of reason and justice, and so she decided to give the mortal a chance to repent. Disguising herself as a very old, frail woman with silver hair and a stooped back, she traveled down to Lydia and found Arachne at her loom. In a croaking voice, the disguised goddess offered her some kindly, paternal advice. She warned Arachne not to offend the gods, to be grateful for her gifts, and to humbly ask Athena's forgiveness for her prideful words. She suggested that the girl should be content to be the greatest mortal weaver and not aspire to challenge a divinity. But Arachne, consumed by her own arrogance, would not be swayed. She barely looked up from her shuttle. "Why doesn't your goddess come down here herself?" She retorted, "Why is she hiding? I would welcome a contest with her. If I lose, I will accept any punishment she chooses." With that, she threw down the gauntlet. At that moment, the old woman's form shimmered and dissolved, revealing the majestic, towering form of Athena, her armor gleaming and her eyes flashing with divine power. The nymphs and onlookers immediately fell to their knees in terror and reverence. But Arachne, to her credit, did not flinch. A silent, tense agreement passed between them. The contest was on. They set up two looms side by side and began to weave. The air hummed with concentration. Athena's tapestry was a masterpiece of divine propaganda and a clear warning. In the center, she wove a magnificent depiction of her own victory over Poseidon in the contest for Athens, showing the moment the citizens chose her gift of the olive tree. In the four corners, she wove four smaller scenes, each showing a mortal who had dared to challenge the gods and had been transformed as punishment. Mount Helion turned into a mountain, the queen of the pygmies transformed into a crane, and others. This was her argument: the gods are justified in their power, their majesty is supreme, and mortal defiance leads only to a grim and metamorphic fate. The borders of the tapestry were woven with intricate olive branches, a symbol of the peace and order the gods bring. It was perfect, majestic, and terrifying. Arachne, meanwhile, chose a radically different subject. Her tapestry was a breathtaking but brazen indictment of the Olympians. She did not depict their glory, she illustrated their crimes. She wove graphic, unflinching scenes of the gods' misdeeds, particularly their deceptive seductions and assaults on mortal women. There was Zeus descending as a bull to carry off Europa, as a swan to approach Leda, as a shower of gold to violate Danae. There was Poseidon abducting women in the form of a stallion or a dolphin. There was Apollo pursuing Daphne and Dionysus tricking Eragon. Each scene was woven with astonishing skill, the horror and tragedy of the mortal victims rendered with palpable empathy, while the gods were shown in their deceptive, animalistic forms. It was a work of profound artistic courage and monumental insolence. Technically, it was flawless, perhaps even more vibrant and alive than Athena's own work. But its message was a direct, searing critique of divine morality. When both tapestries were complete, even Athena, in her fury, had to admit that Arachne's work was perfect. There was no flaw to find in its execution. This technical perfection, combined with its blasphemous subject matter, made the goddess's rage incandescent. The mortal had not only refused to bow, she had used her God-given talent to create a permanent, damning record of divine misbehavior. In a fit of pure, vengeful pique, Athena tore the magnificent tapestry from the loom and shredded it with her shuttle. She then struck Arachne on the head 3 times. The blow did not kill the young woman, but it broke her spirit utterly. Humiliated, defeated, and overwhelmed with a shame she finally understood, Arachne ran away and in her despair tried to hang herself from a rafter. Watching her swing, a sliver of pity, or perhaps a different, more cruel sense of justice pierced Athena's heart. The goddess would not grant her the mercy of death. "Live on, wicked girl," she declared, "but you will hang forever, you and all your descendants, so you will have no cause to forget this lesson." She then sprinkled her with the juices of a magical herb. Immediately, Arachne's body began to shrivel and contort. Her hair fell out, her head and body shrank, and her fingers elongated into long, thin legs. She was transformed into a spider, condemned to spend all of eternity suspended, swinging from a thread, and weaving her beautiful, intricate webs, forever practicing her art but never again being able to challenge the powers that be. The story of Arachne is one of the most complex in all of mythology because it refuses to offer easy answers. On one level, it is the classic cautionary tale the gods would want us to remember. Do not overreach your mortal station, for hubris brings divine retribution. Athena's punishment seems to confirm this, but Arachne's tapestry tells another story entirely. Her art was not flawed, it was too truthful. She held up a mirror to the gods and forced them to look at their own reflection, and they could not bear what they saw. Her sin was not a lack of skill, but an excess of truth-telling. The myth asks us uncomfortable questions about the relationship between art and power. Is the role of the artist to celebrate authority, as Athena did, or to critique it, as Arachne attempted? And what happens when raw talent is coupled with a rebellious spirit? Arachne's transformation into a spider is a punishment, but it is also a bizarre form of immortality. She becomes the mother of all arachnids, and every delicate, geometric web we see is a testament to her undying skill and her eternal, suspended state, a permanent reminder that the price of artistic defiance can be severe, but the urge to create, to weave a story, can never be entirely crushed. While the myths of Greece and Rome often celebrate the glory of empire and the Norse sagas warn of an inevitable twilight, the legends of the Celtic world offer a very different kind of hero, one defined not by a quest for immortality or a throne, but by a ferocious, all-consuming loyalty to his people and a tragic, singular destiny. This is the story of Cuchulainn, the Hound of Ulster, a hero whose life was a blaze of glory so intense it could only ever burn out quickly, embodying the raw, untamed spirit of the Celtic warrior ideal. Our story begins, as many great hero tales do, with a boy who did not know his own name. He was born Setanta, the nephew of King Conchobar mac Nessa of Ulster. Even as a child, his potential was superhuman. At the age of 5, hearing that his uncle's warriors, the famous Red Branch Knights, were the strongest in Ireland, he decided he would join them. He took up his child's toys, a hurling stick, a ball, and a handful of javelins, and set off alone for the king's court at Emain Macha. When he arrived, he immediately broke into a game of hurling and so thoroughly dominated the other boys that they banded together to attack him. In a fit of righteous fury, the young Setanta fought them all off, putting the entire troop of 150 boys to flight. His uncle, Conchobar, saw this display and knew the boy was destined for greatness, welcoming him into his household. The event that would define his life and give him his famous name occurred shortly after, when he was invited to a feast at the home of the royal blacksmith, Cuchulainn. Setanta was playing a game of hurling and told the king he would follow along shortly. When he later arrived at Cuchulainn's fortified dun, he found the gates shut and the massive, ferocious hound the smith used to guard his property unleashed. The beast, a monster of teeth and muscle, charged the boy. With no weapons at hand, Setanta did the impossible. He took his hurling ball and with perfect aim fired it down the animal's throat, choking it. As the hound staggered, he seized it by its hind legs and smashed its body against a stone pillar, killing it instantly. When Cuchulainn and the other guests heard the commotion and rushed outside, they were met with the shocking sight of the dead guard dog and the unharmed boy. The smith was heartbroken, lamenting that his guardian and protector was gone. Without a moment's hesitation, the young Setanta made a stunning offer. "I will apologize for killing your hound," he said, "but I will also make it right. Until a replacement puppy from the same litter has grown large enough to take over guard duties, I myself will guard your property. I will be your hound." The court poet, hearing this, declared that the boy would henceforth be known by this deed Cuchulainn, the Hound of Cuchulainn. It was a name that captured both his lethal power and his profound, unwavering sense of personal honor. As he grew into a man, Cuchulainn's power became both his greatest asset and a terrifying force of nature. In the heat of battle, he was subject to a fearsome transformation known as a rheostrad or warp spasm. This was not a gentle shift but a horrific, full-body contortion that turned him into an unrecognizable monster of pure destruction. The epic text, the Tain Bo Cuelnge, describes it in gruesome detail. One eye sucked into his head while the other bulged out onto his cheek, his mouth stretching to his ears, exposing his internal organs, his hair standing on end with drops of poisonous blood at the tip of each strand, and his body twisting and contorting backwards inside its own skin. A halo of fire flickered around his head, and from the center of his forehead, a strange, mysterious light called the Lon Laith shot upwards. In this state, he could not distinguish friend from foe. He was a whirlwind of death, a divine frenzy unleashed upon the battlefield. This warp spasm was the ultimate expression of the Celtic warrior's ideal, a total surrender to the battle rage that made a man unstoppable, but also inhuman. His death, as foretold by many omens, was a masterpiece of tragic inevitability, a confluence of broken taboos and enforced loyalty that could only end one way. Cuchulainn was bound by 3 Jisa, or sacred taboos. He could never eat the flesh of a dog, he could never refuse a meal offered by a woman, and he could never refuse hospitality from someone whose name contained the word bridge. His enemies, the armies of Queen Medb of Connacht, knew of these taboos and used them to engineer his downfall. As he rode out to his final battle, already wounded and knowing his fate, an old crone, the Morrigan, the goddess of fate and war, in disguise stood by the roadside roasting a dog on a rowan spit. She offered him a portion, forcing him to choose between 2 Jisa, to refuse a meal offered by a woman or to eat the flesh of a dog. Knowing the choice was a trap but bound by his code, he accepted the meal, thus breaking one of his sacred prohibitions and weakening his magical protection. Soon after, he came to a place called the Ford of the Standing Stone. Here he was met by the invading army. Though weakened, he fought with his customary fury, tying himself to the standing stone so he could die on his feet facing his enemies. Even in death, his honor was so immense that his foes were afraid to approach him. It was only when a raven, the bird of the Morrigan, landed on his shoulder, a sign that his spirit had finally departed, that they dared to draw near. As one warrior approached to take his head, Cuchulainn's own sword fell from his dead hand and severed the man's arm. His loyal horse, the Grey of Matcha, fought to protect his body until it too was driven away. The Hound of Ulster had fallen, but his legend, tied to that stone in defiance, would never be broken. His story is the ultimate Celtic tragedy, celebrating a hero whose greatest strength was his unbreakable word, a virtue that in the end his enemies used as the very rope to hang him. After the cosmic order was established and the realms were forged from the body of the primordial giant Ymir, the world was still a place of immense, empty grandeur. The gods Odin, Vili, and Ve walked along the vast, windswept shore of the New World, a place that would one day be known as Midgard. They gazed out at the majestic, silent landscape, the towering mountains, the deep forests, the crashing sea, and while it was a testament to their creative power, it felt incomplete. It lacked a presence to appreciate its beauty, a voice to give it meaning, a will to shape its destiny. The work of building the world was done, but the work of populating it had yet to begin. It was there, on that desolate beach, that they found the raw materials for their next great act of creation. Washed ashore were 2 logs of wood, driftwood from the great sea itself. One was from an ash tree, sturdy and resilient. The other was from an elm, graceful and pliable. These were not just pieces of timber. To the all-seeing eyes of the gods, they were potential. Odin, the breath of spirit, saw in them a vessel for life. Vili, the will and motion, saw the capacity for action. Ve, the sacred form and senses, saw the structure for experience. Together, they decided to transform this inert matter into something the world had never known: humanity. This was not a creation from nothing, but a divine collaboration, with each of the three brothers bestowing a different essential gift. Odin, the Lord of Inspiration, leaned over the first figure and breathed into it. This was not merely air, it was earned, the sacred breath of life, the soul itself. It was the spark of being, the invisible force that animates the clay and separates a living being from a mere object. With this first gift, the log was no longer wood, it was a living creature. Next, Vili stepped forward. He bestowed Arthur not just consciousness, but a vibrant, active intelligence. This was the gift of thought, reason, and passion. It was the capacity to learn, to dream, to feel curiosity and wonder, to make plans and tell stories. It was the inner fire that would drive this new being to explore its world, to seek understanding, and to connect with others. Finally, V provided the tangible, physical gifts that would allow this new life to interact with the world they had built. He gave them La and Litu Gotha, good heat, healthy blood, and radiant color, the signs of vitality and health. He gave them Asjonu, a face with features to express the thoughts and feelings bubbling within. He gave them Heian Og Es John, hearing and sight, so they could perceive the song of the birds and the splendor of the sunrise. He gave them Mal, speech, so they could give names to things and share their inner world with one another. The two logs were transformed. They stood up, no longer Asker and Imbla, the ash and the elm, but Ask and Imbla, the first man and the first woman. They looked upon the gods with new, wondering eyes, and they looked upon each other, the first two of their kind. The gods then gave them a home, the protected, beautiful realm of Midgard, the middle enclosure, a world situated between the icy realm of Niflheim and the fiery realm of Muspelheim, a place of perfect balance designed just for them. What makes this creation myth so profoundly different from many others is its inherent sense of care and value. Humans were not an afterthought, a byproduct, or slaves created for labor. They were fashioned deliberately from materials found in the natural world, instilled with the most divine of qualities: spirit, mind, and senses. They were given a world of their own, not as a prison, but as a garden to tend and a kingdom to rule. This origin story establishes humanity as inherently sacred, invested with a spark of the divine from their very first moment. It is a narrative that confers not just life, but dignity, purpose, and a fundamental connection to the gods who shaped them and the natural world from which they sprang. But the serene order of the celestial plane, maintained by the sun goddess Amaterasu, was not destined to last. Her brother, Susanu, the storm god, was a force of untamable chaos, and when he was cast out of the high heavens for his impetuous behavior, he chose to say farewell to his sister by paying her a visit. His arrival was not a gentle call but a cataclysm. He came roaring down from the mountains, his fury shaking the very pillars of heaven, his rage uprooting the divine rice fields Amaterasu had so carefully tended and defiling her sacred halls. In a final, unforgivable act of desecration, he flayed a heavenly pony alive and hurled its broken body through the roof of her sacred weaving hall, terrifying her maidens so profoundly that they accidentally struck themselves with their own shuttles and died. Amaterasu was not merely angered, she was heartbroken, disgusted, and utterly depleted by her brother's boundless cruelty. This was more than a simple prank or display of bad temper. It was a violent assault on the very principles of order, purity, and life that she embodied. In her deep despair, she could see no way forward in a world that could harbor such senseless darkness. She turned her back on it all. She retreated to the Ama no Iwato, the heavenly rock cave, and sealed the entrance with an immense boulder. The moment she disappeared inside, the source of all light and life in the universe was extinguished. The world did not merely grow dim, it was plunged into an absolute, impenetrable blackness. Without her radiance, the lands fell into a perpetual, frozen night. Evil spirits, emboldened by the endless darkness, ran rampant across the earth. The crops failed, diseases spread, and the voices of the gods themselves were silenced by a blanket of despair. The cosmos began to wither and die. The 8 million kami, the multitude of gods, gathered in desperation outside the cave, their divine forms barely visible in the oppressive gloom. They knew they had to lure Amaterasu out, but how does one coax out the sun itself? Their first attempts were feeble pleas which fell on utterly deaf ears. Then the goddess of dawn and merriment, Aim-no-Uzium, had a brilliant and audacious idea. She understood that they could not plead with Amaterasu's grief. They had to shatter it with something so unexpected, so joyfully irreverent, that it would spark her divine curiosity. Aim-no-Uzium overturned a large tub near the cave's entrance and began to dance upon it. But this was no ordinary dance. She stamped her feet in a powerful, rhythmic rhythm, and as she danced, she began to loosen her garments, eventually casting them off entirely in a state of ecstatic, uninhibited frenzy. The other gods, initially shocked, quickly understood her purpose. They began to clap and chant, and as they watched her wild, hilarious performance, they started to laugh. It was not a polite chuckle, but a roaring, booming, cosmic laughter that shook the very firmament. The sound was so raucous, so utterly out of place in the funereal silence, that it finally pierced the darkness inside the cave. Amaterasu, sitting alone in her self-imposed exile, heard this inexplicable wave of joy and could not understand it. How could the gods be laughing when the world was ending? A flicker of curiosity, the first emotion she had felt besides sorrow, stirred within her. She called out through a tiny crack in the rock, asking what could possibly be so amusing. Aim-no-Uzium, without missing a beat, cleverly replied, "We are celebrating because there is a new goddess among us, one even more radiant and magnificent than you." This was a masterstroke, appealing directly to Amaterasu's pride and her innate sense of wonder. Intrigued and perhaps a little piqued, the sun goddess opened the boulder just a sliver to peer outside. At that exact moment, the gods had positioned the Yota no Kagami, a magnificent 8-sided mirror they had crafted for this very purpose, directly in her line of sight. As Amaterasu leaned forward, she saw a dazzling, brilliant figure staring back at her from the mirror's polished surface, a being of such incredible radiance that she was momentarily captivated. It was, of course, her own reflection, but she did not immediately recognize herself after so long in the darkness. Drawn by this stunning vision, she opened the cave a little wider to get a better look. The moment the opening was wide enough, the strongest of the gods, Tajikarau, who had been hiding beside the entrance, seized the rock and flung it aside entirely. The light of Amaterasu burst forth from the cave, flooding the world with life and warmth once more. The evil spirits shrieked and scattered before her brilliance, the frozen earth began to thaw, and color and sound returned to creation. She was immediately surrounded by the joyful gods, who quickly explained their loving deception. Though initially startled, Amaterasu could not remain angry in the face of such cleverness and such profound relief. Her light was restored, and with it the balance of the entire universe. This myth is the absolute cornerstone of Shinto, Japan's indigenous spiritual tradition. The mirror used to lure Amaterasu out is not just a story prop. It became one of the 3 sacred regalia of the Japanese imperial line, embodying the virtue of wisdom. It represents the idea that the divine is not something distant, but can be reflected within ourselves and the world around us. The story explains the fundamental Shinto principle that the spiritual and the earthly are deeply intertwined. The sun is a goddess, the wind is a god, and the natural world is alive with sacred presence or kami. Most importantly, the myth establishes that harmony and purification are essential. Susanu's actions created impurity and disorder, or kegare, which drove the sun away. The gods' collective effort using laughter, dance, artistry, and cleverness was a great act of purification, or hari, that restored balance. It teaches that light and darkness are not permanent states, but a cycle that can be influenced by our actions, and that even in the deepest despair, joy and community have the power to call the light back into the world. And so we arrive at our final unforgettable tale, a story that is to Chinese mythology what the Odyssey is to the West, a colossal epic that has captivated audiences for centuries. This is the magnificent, sprawling saga known as Journey to the West, a masterpiece of Ming Dynasty literature attributed to the scholar Wu Cheng'an that seamlessly weaves historical fact, vibrant folklore, and profound spiritual allegory into a single, breathtaking adventure. Our story begins not with a quest, but with a birth of pure, chaotic energy, the origin of its true star, Sun Wukong, the Monkey King. He is not born of parents, but emerges fully formed from a magical stone egg nurtured by the primordial forces of heaven and earth. He is clever, powerful, and brimming with insolence. Through sheer cunning and might, he conquers a kingdom of monkeys, seizes a magical staff from the Dragon King of the Eastern Sea that can change size at will, and through his reckless ambition, he earns the title Great Sage, Equal of Heaven. His rebellious nature soon brings him into direct conflict with the celestial bureaucracy of the Jade Emperor and the entire pantheon of Chinese gods. He eats the peaches of immortality, consumes the pills of longevity, and in a fit of rage defeats almost every warrior heaven can send against him. His defiance is so absolute that only the Buddha himself can finally subdue him. For his arrogance, the Buddha buries him under the 5 Elements mountain for 500 years, not to destroy him, but to contain him until his energies can be redirected toward a greater purpose. That purpose arrives in the form of a humble, pious monk. This character is based on a real historical figure, the Buddhist monk Xuanzang, who in the 7th century undertook an incredibly perilous 16-year journey from China to India to retrieve authentic Buddhist scriptures and bring them back to the Tang Empire. In the epic, this monk, also named Xuanzang or Tang Sanzang, is chosen by the Bodhisattva Guanyin for a sacred mission, to travel west to the Thunder Monastery in India to obtain the true Buddhist sutras that will enlighten and save all humanity. He is the embodiment of compassion and devotion, but he is also physically weak, easily frightened, and hopelessly naive, a perfect counterbalance to the chaotic powerhouse he is destined to lead. Guanyin knows the journey is too dangerous for the monk to attempt alone, so she arranges for him to have protectors. She finds the Monkey King imprisoned under his mountain and offers him a chance for redemption and freedom. Serve the monk as his disciple and bodyguard on the pilgrimage. Sun Wukong, desperate for release, agrees. Along the way, they are joined by 2 other fallen celestial beings seeking their own path to redemption. There is Zhu Beiji, the 8 Precepts pig, a former marshal of the Heavenly Navy who was banished to Earth for drunkenly flirting with the moon goddess and reborn in the body of a monstrous half-man, half-pig. He is gluttonous, lazy, and lustful, constantly led astray by his base desires, yet he possesses immense strength. The 3rd disciple is Sha Wujing, the Sand Monk, a former celestial curtain commander who was exiled for breaking a precious heavenly vase and now resides in a river, a quiet and dependable but often overlooked figure who carries the luggage. Finally, there is the 3rd prince of the Dragon King, who had offended heaven and was transformed into a white horse to serve as Xuanzang's steed. This quartet of flawed, bickering, but ultimately loyal disciples forms one of the most beloved and dysfunctional families in all of literature. Their journey west is the heart of the epic, a long and perilous road filled with 81 tribulations, each one a test of their resolve, faith, and teamwork. The obstacles are rarely just physical challenges. They are deeply symbolic, often manifestations of inner demons and spiritual failings. The landscape itself is allegorical, representing the difficult path toward enlightenment. The most common threat comes from myriad demons and evil spirits who learn of a potent rumor. If they can capture the monk Xuanzang and eat a piece of his flesh, they will gain immortality. This premise sets up countless thrilling battles where Sun Wukong must use his incredible powers, his shape-shifting, his cloud somersaults that carry him 30,000 miles in a single leap, and his magic staff to outwit and defeat these fiendish foes. But the true brilliance of the story lies in the dynamics between the pilgrims. Xuanzang, though holy, is often a frustrating master. He cannot see through the demon's clever disguises, and he frequently punishes his most powerful protector, Sun Wukong, by reciting the tight-filing CIRCLET Chinese letter, a magical band placed on the monkey's head that causes excruciating pain when the monk chants the words. This usually happens because Sun Wukong, who can see the true demonic nature hidden beneath a beautiful facade, has violently exposed a threat, and the monk, seeing only violence, chastises him for lacking compassion. Zhu Beiji constantly complains, tries to shirk work, and often suggests they should just give up and go home, representing the pull of worldly desires. Sha Wujing is the steady, patient mediator, though his contributions are often limited to urging his brothers to stop fighting and remember their duty. Their constant bickering and flaws make them deeply relatable. They are not perfect saints on a sacred mission, but a group of deeply imperfect beings struggling, failing, and growing together on the path toward a greater good. After overcoming all 81 trials, the group finally reaches the Thunder Monastery in the Western Paradise. They are granted an audience with the Buddha and receive the sacred scriptures. However, in a final, humorous test of their humanity, the Buddhas in charge of the scriptures give them blank scrolls at first because they had failed to offer a proper bribe. Once that minor worldly matter is sorted, they receive the true sutras. Their mission complete, they begin their journey home, now aided by celestial protection. As a reward for their perseverance, the Buddha grants them enlightenment and reinstates them to their former heavenly positions, but now purified and elevated. Sun Wukong, the rebellious monkey who once claimed equality with heaven, finally achieves true and lasting Buddhahood himself, becoming the victorious fighting Buddha, his immense power and spirit finally channeled into a divine purpose. Journey to the West is far more than a simple adventure story. On one level, it is a thrilling fantasy, a road trip comedy, and an action-packed saga that has inspired countless movies, TV shows, and video games. On a deeper level, it is a profound allegory for the individual's path to enlightenment in the Chan Buddhist tradition. The monk Xuanzang represents the everyday human consciousness, seeking truth but easily misled. Sun Wukong represents the untamed, restless human mind, brilliant, powerful, but prone to arrogance and distraction, which must be disciplined and focused on a higher goal to be effective. Zhu Beiji represents raw appetite and desire, which must be acknowledged and controlled, not eliminated. And Sha Wujing represents the calm, diligent nature that provides stability on the long journey. Their collective pilgrimage is a metaphor for the integration of these different parts of the self, working in harmony to overcome the demons of temptation, illusion, and ego, ultimately achieving spiritual liberation. It is a story that acknowledges the difficulty of the path, the necessity of teamwork, and the beautiful truth that even the most flawed and rebellious among us can achieve a state of grace. And so our incredible journey through these 30 unforgettable tales comes to a close, a journey that has taken us from the primordial chaos of the Greek creation to the enlightened triumph of the Monkey King in China. We have witnessed the raw, untamed power of nature in the Norse sagas, the intricate balance of order and chaos in Egyptian duality, and the profound spiritual quests woven through Indian and Japanese lore. Each story a unique thread from a different corner of the globe, yet together they form a magnificent tapestry that reveals something fundamental about us all. What is truly astonishing is how these ancient narratives, born from cultures separated by continents and centuries, so often echo the same profound questions. The mystery of where we come from, with worlds sculpted from the body of a giant or emerging from a cosmic egg. the timeless struggle between order and chaos, whether it's Ra battling Apophis every night or the gods of Asgard holding back the forces of Ragnarok. The enduring nature of the hero's journey, where a figure, be it the cunning Odysseus, the devoted Rama, or the powerful Cuchulainn, faces impossible trials and is forever changed. And of course, the deep, complex passions of the human heart, the devastating love of Orpheus, the vengeful fury of Medea, the all-consuming curiosity of Pandora, and the tragic vanity of Narcissus. These myths were the original vessels for human wisdom, the frameworks our ancestors used to explain everything from the changing seasons to the stars in the sky, from the nature of death to the meaning of duty. They taught lessons about hubris and humility, about the importance of hospitality, the sanctity of an oath, and the price of defiance. They gave people gods who were not distant and perfect, but flawed, passionate, and often petulant, making the cosmos feel as unpredictable and dramatic as their own lives. More than just stories, they were a way of understanding the world and our place within it. Their power is far from spent. You can find their echoes everywhere you look. The hero's journey is the backbone of almost every blockbuster film, from Star Wars to Black Panther. The tragic flaws of a character like Anakin Skywalker are pure Greek drama. The mighty Thor and the mischievous Loki have leaped straight from the prose Edda onto our movie screens. The psychological concepts of narcissism and the Oedipus complex are named for these ancient characters. These tales are embedded in our language, our art, and our collective imagination because they speak to truths that are always relevant. They explore the light and the dark within us all, and they remind us that the struggles of love, loss, identity, and purpose are as old as storytelling itself. This exploration may be ending, but the conversation is just beginning. I would love to hear which of these stories resonated most deeply with you. Was it the heartbreaking loyalty of the Hound of Ulster, the clever triumph of the Monkey King, the tragic ambition of Icarus? Let me know your favorite in the comments below. Share which myth has stuck with you long after the tale was told. And if one of these cultures particularly captured your imagination, I encourage you to dive deeper. Read the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest story we have. Lose yourself in the dramatic pages of the Iliad or the magical journey of the Ramayana. There are countless more incredible stories waiting for you, each one a window into the soul of a civilization and a mirror reflecting our own timeless hope.